Chapter 4083. In the middle of the night, Yenshu Grotto Heaven was in complete silence. Only groups of guards were still patrolling, and no one else was moving around. For the past month, the defense and security of Yenshu Grotto Heaven had been tight. For some reason, the number of patrols and guards had increased by 50% since the evening. Now, the defense of Yenshu Grotto Heaven had reached its peak, and it was impregnable. Many guards guessed that the rebel alliance had just been formed today, and the war was about to begin. That was why they were so nervous. The entire Yenshu Grotto Heaven was filled with a solemn and murderous aura. The 8 families, led by the Feng clan and the Lan clan, were well behaved after staying in their respective palaces. They did not move around as they were busy with their tasks, dispatching their elite disciples to Yenshu Grotto Heaven as soon as possible. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the rest were busy as usual, and there was nothing unusual. As for Chief Ji Tianqing, he returned to the secret room to cultivate in seclusion as usual. But other than Nangong Buhua and his daughter, no one knew about Ji Tianqing's real whereabouts. In fact, he had quietly left Yenshu Grotto Heaven and rushed to the northeast at his fastest speed. In the evening, Nangong Buhua sorted out the information from Nangong Ao and the 8th elder and handed it to Ji Tianqing. The few jade slips recorded the information that the 2 elders had risked their lives to investigate for more than a month. Fortunately, the 2 elders had split up to increase their efficiency. In more than a month, they had used the Nangong clan's intelligence network to investigate more than 60 regions, and drew up a death list. According to their speed, they would have completed the task in at most a month's time, and produced a complete and detailed death list. But unfortunately, they were caught at this critical juncture. When the 8th elder and Nangong Ao split up, with Yenshu Grotto Heaven as the center line, one headed to the east and the other to the west. The 8th elder was in charge of the southwest and northwest regions, while Nangong Ao was in charge of the southeast and northeast regions. Before Nangong Ao was caught, he was in the Hetian region in the northeast. The information from the Nangong clan also stated that the battle took place in the Hetian region, within the borders of the Golden River Empire. Therefore, Ji Tianqing had a clear goal. After leaving Yenshu's cave, he rushed to Hetian region as fast as he could. His flying speed was very fast, but in order to be even faster, he used the god-slaying battleship. The god-slaying battleship's formations were fully activated. Every 2 hours, it would consume resources worth billions of godstones. It sped towards the northeast at a speed faster than light. Most importantly, when the deity-slaying battleship flew above the sea of clouds, it would not shine with divine light. It would also conceal its tracks and aura. Therefore, Ji Tianqing sped all the way without being discovered by anyone. From the Yenshu cave to the Hetian region, even with the speed of a peak divine king, it would still take 4 days to fly non-stop. However, with the god-slaying battleship at full power, it only took 1.5 days to arrive. Of course, the price he had to pay was also very high. He had consumed more than 100 billion god stones and cultivation resources. This was the entire wealth of many high god kings. If the Nangong clan knew about this, they would definitely be shocked and touched. Early in the morning, when the sun rose, the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Hetian region and was about to enter the territory of the Golden River Empire. Ji Tianqing had predicted that the Meng Shuai would send a message to the Nangong clan 1 day later. In fact, he had overestimated the Meng Shuai's efficiency. After 1.5 days, the Nangong clan finally received a message from the Meng Shuai. After receiving the message, Nangong Buhua did not waste any time and immediately forwarded it to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing had just entered the territory of the Golden River Empire when he received the message from Nangong Buhua. After reading the message, he immediately frowned. His face was somewhat gloomy, and his eyes flashed with cold killing intent. The situation was just as he had expected. The patrol commander Qi Yan was in the northwest. After capturing the 8th elder, he interrogated him for 2 days and 2 nights, and then killed him. The 8th elder was beheaded in public, and his corpse was still hanging outside the capital of an empire. After capturing Nangong Ao in the Hetian region, the Meng Shuai left that very night. Now, the Meng Shuai was using Nangong Ao's life to threaten the Nangong clan to hand over the Kenshin. Of course, the Meng Shuai also guessed that the Nangong clan would not exchange Kenshin's life for Nangong Ao's. Therefore, the Meng Shuai purposely left an address and target to lure the Nangong clan and the Kenshin to take revenge. The Meng Shuai announced that at noon on the 14th of April, he would publicly execute Nangong Ao outside the capital of the true martial domain, the true martial empire. In order to punish the traitor, he would torture Nangong Ao by 1,000 cuts and refine him with soul fire. This was the only way to warn the various forces of the boundless heaven continent and intimidate the traitors. After hearing this news, Ji Tianqing understood that the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor had planned to set up an inescapable net in the true martial domain. Damn it! I miscalculated. Their trap is not in the Hetian region, but in the true martial domain. When Ji Tianqing and Nangong Buhua were discussing countermeasures, they did not consider this detail. As a result, he spent hundreds of billions of god stones to rush to the Hetian region as quickly as possible, only to end up empty-handed. This also meant that the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor were very cunning and difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it was not a big problem. Ji Tianqing steered the deity-slaying battleship and continued to fly north. He calculated silently, the 14th of April, which is 7 days later. The true martial domain is in the north, very close to the headquarters of the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor. Under normal circumstances, if I bring Nangong Buhua and the rest from the Yenshu Grotto Heaven to the true martial domain, we can reach there in 7 days. If we relax or slow down, we might not be able to rescue Nangong Ao in time. The Meng Shuai's deadline is very accurate. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing had acted in advance and arrived at the Hetian region at an unimaginable speed. If he flew north for another day, he would reach the true martial domain. This was his biggest advantage. If he did not leave the Yenshu Grotto Heaven in advance, he would not have a secret weapon like the deity-slaying battleship. Then, he would have fallen into the Meng Shuai's trap and rushed to the true martial domain with Nangong Buhua and the rest, only to fall into the trap and be ambushed from all sides. As he steered the deity-slaying battleship towards the north, Ji Tianqing sent a message to Nangong Buhua. I have arrived at the Hetian region and am on my way to the true martial domain. This matter is in the bag, you don't have to worry. Also, act according to the original plan. We must deceive everyone. Not long after, Nangong Buhua received his message and immediately gathered all the clan leaders and suzerains to the Great Light Hall for a meeting. At the same time, Ji Tianqing, who had been cultivating in seclusion in the secret chamber, walked out of the secret chamber and stepped into the Great Light Hall. Chapter 4084. Within 15 minutes, more than 40 God King experts had gathered in the Great Light Hall. The doors were closed and the guards were guarding the hall. The atmosphere in the hall was very solemn. Ji Tianqing, who was dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade crown, sat on the throne. Nangong Buhua, the 7 clan leaders, and Su Balian sat on his left and right. Everyone who was supposed to be here was present. Ji Tianqing asked solemnly, Nangong family head, you said that there was an urgent matter that needed everyone to discuss. What happened? Nangong Buhua quickly got up and bowed. He reported, Alliance Master, I just received an ultimatum from the Meng Shuai. The situation is just as you expected. Inspector Commander Qi Yan has killed our clan's 8th elder. The Meng Shuai has imprisoned our 9th elder and brought him to the true martial region. He will be beheaded on the 14th of April. Next, Ji Tianqing, the clan leaders, and the sect leaders started to discuss countermeasures. Everyone was in a heavy mood. They were worried and angry. They were all advising Ji Tianqing and discussing seriously. No one noticed anything strange about Alliance Master Ji Tianqing, who was sitting at the head of the table. After all, the Divine Phoenix clan leader, Lan Wuji, and Su Balian were all 9th stage god kings. None of them was a peak god king. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew that the real Ji Tianqing had arrived in the He Tian region long ago. The Kenshin, sitting on the throne, was actually a doppelganger left behind by Ji Tianqing. The doppelganger was exactly the same as Ji Tianqing. There was no difference in body or soul aura. Not to mention the 7 clan leaders and Su Balian, even Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang could not tell who was real and who was fake. In fact, the doppelganger only had half of the original strength. Even so, Ji Tianqing's doppelganger was stronger than an ordinary peak god king. With the strength realms of these divine king powerhouses in the Great Hall, how could they possibly see through any clues? Not long after, the various patriarchs and sect masters came up with a plan with Ji Tianqing. Everyone continued to carry out their mission. They gathered their men and waited for news in the cave of Yenshu. Ji Tianqing would personally head to the true martial domain to rescue Nangong Ao. Although everyone was very worried about his safety, they repeatedly advised him not to put himself in danger. However, he insisted that Nangong Ao was his friend and ally. Since everyone had formed an alliance, they could not easily give up on anyone. No matter how dangerous it was, he had to save Nangong Ao. Of course, these words touched the experts of the various clans and sects, making them feel that this alliance was a wise choice. Thus, an hour later, Nangong Buhua, the clan leader of the Divine Phoenix clan, Lan Wuji, and more than 30 experts from the 9 forces escorted Ji Tianqing out of Yenshu's cave and sent him on his journey. Everyone waved goodbye to Ji Tianqing outside the cave of Yenshu. After watching his figure disappear into the horizon, the experts returned to the cave of Yenshu. It didn't take long for the news to reach Meng Shuai's hands through some confidential channels. On the surface, the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor did not do anything for more than a month. In fact, they had already agreed on a plan and secretly made many arrangements. It was inevitable that they would plant spies around the cave of Yenshu and infiltrate the cave of Yenshu. Perhaps, the spies and informants would not be able to find out about the secrets in the cave of Yenshu. However, Ji Tianqing was going to battle openly, and the leaders of the various forces were sending him off. This was a grand occasion. As long as the spies and informants were not blind, they would definitely find out. Soon, the Meng Shuai, who was billions of miles away, received the news that Kenshin had left the cave of Yenshu alone to rescue Nangong Ao. After looking through the transmission jade slip, Meng Shuai laughed coldly a few times in disdain and ordered the Divine King powerhouses under his command to increase their speed and advance. As I expected, Kenshin is still as arrogant as before. He knew that I would set up an ambush, but he still came to rescue Nangong Ao alone. He is so arrogant that he looks down on me and the imperial tutor. That is the way to his death. Send my order to speed up and return to the domain of true martial as soon as possible. I will try to increase the power of the traps and ambushes so that Kenshin will die in the domain of true martial. It was obvious that the Meng Shuai was on the divine ship to escort Nangong Ao to the domain of true martial. After all, he had captured Nangong Ao in the Hetian region 3 days ago and left that very night to return to the domain of true martial. He was leading many elite soldiers on 3 divine ships, so he could not speed up. Even if he sped up, it would take him 3 days to reach the domain of true martial. He estimated that Kenshin would take 7 days to reach the domain of true martial. In this way, he would have 4 days to increase the power of the traps and ambushes when he returned to the domain of true martial. As he calculated these things in his mind, the Meng Shuai sneered and muttered to himself, Kenshin, you were too arrogant in the past and that was why you died. Even though you have returned to your peak, you are still so arrogant. This time, you will make the same mistake and die without a burial place. Everyone thought that Kenshin was rushing to the domain of true martial after leaving the cave of Yenshu. However, Ji Tianqing's doppelganger flew for hundreds of thousands of miles after leaving the cave of Yenshu. When he saw that no one was watching or following him, he quietly turned back. After 2 hours, he quietly returned to the cave of Yenshu. This matter was still hidden from everyone. Only Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang knew about it. Ji Tianqing's original body continued to drive the deity-slaying battleship to the domain of true martial. Unknowingly, 18 hours had passed. It was now midnight. In 6 hours, the deity-slaying battleship would reach the domain of true martial at dawn. However, Ji Tianqing did not continue forward. Instead, he changed his direction slightly and flew toward the east. The reason why he did not go to the domain of true martial was not because he was afraid of the traps and ambushes set by the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor. It was because he was sure that the Meng Shuai had not returned to the domain of true martial since he was escorting Nangong Ao. 4 days ago, the Meng Shuai captured Nangong Ao. Even if he immediately left the Hetian region and returned to the domain of true martial, he would still be in the domain of true martial. He had more than 2,000 elite soldiers and 3 divine ships with him. It was impossible for him to travel quickly. Even if there were no delays, it would still take him 6 days to return to the domain of true martial. In other words, the Meng Shuai is now 2 days away from the domain of true martial. Ji Tianqing sat in the cockpit of the deity-slaying battleship and calculated silently. A map of the boundless heaven continent appeared in his mind as he began to deduce the Meng Shuai's route. The distance from the Hetian region to the domain of true martial was the shortest in a straight line. He knew clearly which regions he would pass through. Since the Meng Shuai was 2 days away from the domain of true martial, Ji Tianqing immediately deduced that the Meng Shuai should be in the center of the domain of true martial. His current location was in the northwest of the domain of true martial. After many deductions and verifications, he finally determined that if he rushed to the domain of true martial to kill the Meng Shuai, he would most likely encounter the Meng Shuai's divine ships at the northern border of the domain of true martial. Chapter 4085. The Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor spent a month amassing troops in the realm of true martial and setting up an inescapable trap. They want to use this opportunity to kill me before the rebel alliance takes action. This way, the boundless heaven continent won't fall into chaos, and they'll pay the smallest price to achieve their ultimate goal. It's a brilliant plan. But they don't know that I won't go to the realm of true martial. When the Meng Shuai is on his way back to the realm of true martial, I'll take him by surprise and rescue Nangong Ao. These thoughts flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind, and his lips curled into a playful sneer. War was never a head-on clash between military might and military might. It was more about the use of wisdom and strategy. In the center of the Gale domain, the long night passed, and dawn finally arrived. The sky had just brightened, and above a sea of white clouds, 3 divine warships flew past at lightning speed. The leading divine warship was 3,000 meters long and scarlet in color. Its design was fierce and callous, like a divine eagle spreading its wings to kill its prey. This was the Meng Shuai's flagship, a superior king-grade divine warship that could accommodate several thousand soldiers. But at this moment, there were only 800 elite soldiers on board. Behind the Meng Shuai's flagship were 2 black divine warships about 800 meters long, one on the left and one on the right. These were the warships of the 2 great generals. In terms of grade, defense, and power, they were slightly inferior to the Meng Shuai's flagship. However, in these 2 warships, there were also 800 officers and soldiers. The 2,400 soldiers on these 3 divine warships had won the battle in the Hetian region and captured the 9th elder of the Nangong clan. Naturally, they'd made a great contribution. But on their way back to the realm of true martial, the soldiers weren't too excited. They knew that the real battle hadn't begun yet. Once they returned to the realm of true martial, they still had to follow orders and carry out the mission of killing the Kenshin. That was the most important and also the most difficult task. If they could win this battle and successfully kill the Kenshin, then they would truly have made a great contribution, which was worthy of pride and celebration. Therefore, on the way back to the domain of true martial, the soldiers on the 3 divine warships all quietly circulated and regulated their breathing, conserving their energy. A small number of guards remained vigilant and alert. But in reality, they were just carrying out their mission as usual and were not worried about their safety. After all, everyone knew that Kenshin had just received the news and was on his way to the true martial domain. Even if Kenshin was the fastest, it would still take him 5 to 6 days to arrive. Their journey would be very safe and peaceful. Not only did the soldiers have such thoughts, even Grand Marshal Meng had the same thought. Along the way, the Meng Shuai had been meditating in the secret chamber of the ship and had barely shown his face. He never thought that there would be any danger along the way. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to strengthen the ambush after returning to the true martial domain. Just as the sun was about to rise, a smear of orange appeared on the horizon. The Meng Shuai's ship and 2 black warships were flying over a vast lake. Suddenly, a 5-colored divine light shot up from the lake in front of the 3 divine warships. Whoosh! The divine light was oval-shaped and about 10,000 miles wide. It instantly rose into the sky like a towering wall. This 5-colored wall of light rapidly expanded, connecting the lake on the ground and the sea of clouds in the sky, forming a massive canopy. The God King generals piloting the 3 divine warships noticed that something was wrong. They immediately sounded the alarm and steered the divine warships to the left and right. However, 5-colored divine light that blotted out the sun also appeared in the sky to the left and right. Whoosh! 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 5-colored divine light shot up from the front, back, left, and right of the 3 divine warships and gathered high in the sky. In the blink of an eye, a semicircular canopy of 10,000 miles wide sealed off the area. The 3 divine warships were trapped in the 5-colored canopy. They immediately felt a terrifying pressure descend upon them, causing them to tremble violently in descend. Even a fool would know that they had fallen into an ambush. An expert had set up a heaven and earth great array here, trapping them in a trap. Fortunately, the generals piloting the divine warships were relatively calm and carried out a series of emergency plans without panicking. First, they woke up the Meng Shuai and all the soldiers. Then, they stopped the divine warships in the sky and activated all the formations to resist the suppression of the heaven and earth formation. The 2,400 soldiers on the 3 divine warships also appeared to be well trained. After they were awakened, they finished assembling in just 10 breaths and entered a state of readiness for battle. The Meng Shuai walked out of the secret chamber and entered the main hall of the divine warship to personally command his soldiers. When his orders were passed on to the other 2 divine warships, all the soldiers had finished assembling and were ready for battle. The Meng Shuai released his divine sense to investigate the situation within 10,000 miles. He was furious. His face darkened as he thought to himself, which daring bastard dares to set up a formation here to ambush Benshuai's warship? Damn bastard, this marshal will definitely skin you alive and pull out your tendons. However, even after his divine sense had searched the surrounding area several times, he still could not find a single person. Damn it! Cowards who hide their heads but show their tails. The Meng Shuai cursed angrily. He immediately ordered the 3 divine warships to get into formation and forcibly break through the 5-colored canopy. Soon, the 3 divine warships arranged themselves into a sword formation. With the Meng Shuai's warship in the lead, they headed straight for the 5-colored canopy in the north. Whoosh! With the Meng Shuai's order, the 3 divine warships exploded with their fastest speed and fiercest firepower toward the 5-colored canopy. Boom! Crack! With a deafening noise, the Meng Shuai's warship was the first to hit the 5-colored canopy. Dazzling fragments of divine light burst out and a destructive blast of air burst forth. Within 10,000 miles, the sea of clouds in the sky dissipated, and the lakes on the ground dried up. The endless lake water evaporated and turned into a mist that covered the sky and the sun. However, the five-colored canopy shook violently more than 10 times and cracked, but it did not shatter. On the other hand, the Meng Shuai's warship suffered the violent recoil and was sent flying backward. Fortunately, it flew sideways and did not hit the other two warships. Otherwise, it would have led to a disaster and heavy casualties. Unlike now, where only a small number of people had suffered minor injuries. Before the earth-shattering noise dissipated, the other two black warships hit the five-colored canopy one after another. Boom! Boom! With a muffled boom, the two black warships were also sent flying back, tumbling hundreds of miles away. The five-colored canopy shook violently but did not crack, let alone shatter. A moment later, the three divine warships stabilized themselves as they fell and continued to float in the sky. The defensive power of the five-colored canopy had obviously exceeded the Meng Shuai's expectations. His face grew darker as he pondered how to break this worldly array. Chapter 4086. Even at this moment, Meng Shuai still couldn't guess who set up this great formation to ambush him. As for Ji Tianqing, he did not even think about it. After all, Ji Tianqing had just left Yanshu's grotto heaven not long ago and was still on his way. How could he appear here? Just as the Meng Shuai was using his eye technique to observe the five-colored light shield, some of his subordinates spoke up. The deputy generals beside him all suggested, "Marshal Meng, let's gather all the soldiers and form a battle formation to attack together. We will definitely be able to break this formation." That's right. We used the warship to crash into the formation. In order not to damage the warship, we held back. However, if the soldiers form a battle formation, the impact will be several times stronger. The Meng Shuai also thought that this idea was feasible and was weighing the pros and cons. At this moment, a white light suddenly appeared in the sky ahead. Before anyone could react, the white light flashed across the sky and slashed the waist of the Meng Shuai's warship. Kaboom! There was a thunderous sound as the white light disappeared, but a huge gap had been cut open at the waist of the warship. The gap was 100 feet long and 10 feet wide. Sparks flew everywhere, divine light shot out, and debris spilled out. The incomparably violent force of the impact sent the warship flying, rolling and crashing dozens of miles away. The 800 soldiers in the warship were caught off guard by the sudden attack and were all dizzy from the fall. Fortunately, they were prepared for battle and managed to stabilize themselves in time when the warship was rolling and flying. Otherwise, the 800 soldiers would have been in a mess. Of course, the gap left by the white light was originally a few secret chambers. In one of the secret rooms, there were 8 guards standing guard outside the door. No matter what happened, they would not leave. However, when the white light slashed the warship, 6 of them were killed in an instant. The other 2 protectors were lucky to survive, but they were also severely injured. When the Meng Shuai released his divine sense to check the gap and connected it with the white light, he suddenly understood something. Enemy attack. The person who ambushed us has finally made his move. That white light just now was sword light. Quick, prepare for battle. The Meng Shuai reacted quickly and immediately figured out the truth. At the same time, he also guessed the purpose of the ambushers. They were probably trying to rescue the person in the secret chamber at the gap. The person imprisoned in the secret chamber was none other than Nangong Ao. The Meng Shuai frowned as various thoughts flashed through his mind. An expert is coming to rescue Nangong Ao. Who wants to rescue Nangong Ao? Kenshin. Impossible. He can't be so fast. It can't be Kenshin or Nangong Buhua or the leaders of the 8 forces. So, it is likely an expert from the ancient era. This ancient clan secretly sided with the sword god and was ordered to save Nangong Ao. In the Meng Shuai was Meng Shuai's guess. And the Meng Shuai was the most. Out of the 20 godly king experts on the flagship, 10 of them immediately stepped forward and led the 300 godly monarch experts out of the flagship. Whoosh! 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 They flew to the gap at the waist of the flagship and surrounded it, vigilantly watching their surroundings. The remaining 10 god kings and 500 monarchs remained in the flagship. Some of them protected the Meng Shuai, while the others guarded the internal passage. The other 2 black warships that had not been ambushed also became nervous. However, the 3 divine warships were all on high alert. Their nerves were tense. The ambushers who were hiding in the dark had disappeared without a trace. They did not launch any more sneak attacks. There was a dead silence. The atmosphere was so heavy that it seemed as if the air had frozen. Even Meng Shuai couldn't detect the traces and aura of the assailants with his own divine spells. This was too strange. The Meng Shuai also felt that something was wrong. He was a true peak god king. Except for the 5 god emperors, no one should be able to get within 10,000 miles of him and evade his detection. At the thought of this, Meng Shuai's heart felt uneasy. Ji Tianqing was the one who had set up the heaven and earth formation in the middle of the lake. He had calculated that the Meng Shuai would have to pass through here, so he had set up the formation as soon as he arrived. In order to set up the most powerful formation in the shortest time possible and ensure that it could trap the Meng Shuai and his 2,000 elite soldiers, he had used 36 superior king-rank divine artifacts. He had arranged the divine artifacts around him to form the foundation of the formation. Thus, this great formation was completed in half an hour. Moreover, it could withstand the impact of 3 divine battleships without shattering or collapsing. When the 3 warships passed by, Ji Tianqing activated the formation without hesitation and sealed them here. However, he was not in a hurry to act, nor did he reveal himself. He knew full well the goal of this operation. Killing the Meng Shuai and his 2,000 elite soldiers was secondary. His top priority was to rescue Nangong Ao. Thus, he hid in the dark and searched for Nangong Ao's whereabouts. He secretly cast a secret technique to investigate the situation inside the 3 divine warships. According to his speculations, Nangong Ao was most likely imprisoned in the Meng Shuai's warship. He had guessed correctly. He did not investigate the 2 black warships. Instead, he searched for the Meng Shuai's warship and found Nangong Ao's aura. Although the secret chamber where Nangong Ao was imprisoned was protected by several layers of formations, he could not see what was going on inside. However, he saw that after the Meng Shuai had issued the order to fight, the 800 soldiers had gathered. There were still 8 high divine lords standing guard outside one of the secret chambers. Moreover, the defensive formation of that secret room was exceptionally powerful. There were several layers of it inside and outside. Ji Tianqing immediately guessed that Nangong Ao was most likely imprisoned in that secret chamber. Otherwise, the Meng Shuai would not have spent so much effort on an ordinary secret chamber. He had guessed correctly. When he slashed the Meng Shuai's warship and made a huge hole in it, the 6 guards were instantly killed. The 6 guards were killed on the spot, and a layer of the defensive formation of the secret room was also destroyed. The Meng Shuai immediately became nervous. He sent out 10 god kings and 300 divine lords to surround the hole and the secret chamber. This further confirmed Ji Tianqing's speculation. However, he was not in a hurry to show himself or rescue Nangong Ao. After all, the secret chamber was protected by 4 layers of defensive formations and 10 god kings and 300 divine lords were guarding the hole. The Meng Shuai, 10 god kings and 500 divine lords were also on high alert in the warship. Once he showed himself or attacked, the Meng Shuai would be able to detect his location and attack him. If he was surrounded by the Meng Shuai, 20 god kings and 800 divine lords, the 1,600 soldiers on the other 2 warships would do their best to kill him. No matter how powerful he was, there was no way he could withstand the combined attack of a peak god king, 40 god kings and 2,400 divine lords. Chapter 4087. Ji Tianqing was alone against 3 divine warships and 2,400 experts. He could not act rashly. He could only calmly analyze the situation and create opportunities. The Meng Shuai is already on guard. Although he isn't sure that I'm the one who ambushed him, he should have guessed that I'm going to rescue Nangong Ao. I can't save Nangong Ao yet. I have to think of a way to distract them and make the battlefield chaotic. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing remained invisible and quietly flew toward the 2 black divine warships. It was obviously unwise to continue attacking the Meng Shuai's divine warships. After all, everyone's attention was focused on them. Instead, the 2 black divine warships became their weak points. Swish! The next moment, Ji Tianqing appeared on the side of one of the black divine warships and slashed with his sword as fast as he could. It was still a blinding white sword aura that was 10,000 feet long. It flashed across the sky like a bolt of lightning. In order to prevent the Meng Shuai from seeing through his identity, Ji Tianqing did not use his signature move or even the sword intent of heaven piercing. The attack was powerful, but there was nothing special about it. It was probably not powerful enough to deal with the Meng Shuai. But it was enough to deal with the 2 black divine warships. Kaboom! Along with an earth-shattering boom, the sword beam struck the black battleship, causing countless sparks and metal fragments to fly everywhere. The black battleship that was 8,000 feet long was actually cut in half by Ji Tianqing. The divine warship was cut in 2. The cut was smooth and flat. Debris and dozens of divine lords were thrown out of the cut. The violent impact threw the 2 halves of the divine warship into the air and sent it tumbling to the ground. Countless screams and cries rang out. Hundreds of divine lords fled the divine warships in a panic and flew in all directions. At this moment, Ji Tianqing swung his fist and sent out a fist shadow the size of a mountain. This was a simplified version of the draconic elephant divine fist. Its power was the same, but it did not have the draconic elephant divine fist. It was simple. He wanted to avoid being recognized by the Meng Shuai. Pang pang pang. The mountain-sized golden fist aura smashed into the crowd, producing a series of muffled sounds. The hundreds of Sur gods who were fleeing in panic were instantly blasted into minced meat. Blood splattered all over the sky. With just this move, Ji Tianqing had instantly killed more than 100 Sur gods. The other 600 Sur gods were scared out of their wits as they ran even faster. The battlefield instantly became chaotic. There were figures everywhere, and there was no formation to speak of. The Meng Shuai and the soldiers became alert and turned their attention to the broken warship. Originally, the Meng Shuai wanted to use a secret technique to find out where Ji Tianqing was. However, Ji Tianqing's reaction was too fast. Almost at the same time, he slashed out his sword light and punched out with his fist radiance, and then quickly concealed himself. As a result, the Meng Shuai missed him again and failed to capture his aura and traces. Damn it! This coward is too despicable. The Meng Shuai was so angry that he gritted his teeth and his face turned pale. In his anger, he flew out of the warship and hovered in the sky with a saber in his hand. He had accumulated all his energy and was surrounded by a terrifying murderous aura. He looked around with sharp eyes. This time, his immortal will covered a radius of 10,000 miles and even a speck of dust could be seen. As long as Ji Tianqing attacked again, he would not miss it. He would definitely be able to lock onto Ji Tianqing's aura. However, Ji Tianqing hit at the edge of the array and stared at him from a few thousand miles away, waiting patiently. 100 seconds later, the sky calmed down again. Ji Tianqing did not attack, and the Meng Shuai was still on guard. The 2 halves of the battleship fell to the ground. The 600 Sur gods who were lucky enough to survive had all escaped and gathered together, still in a state of shock. A few minutes later, the wounded were also treated. More than 2,000 soldiers clenched their weapons tightly, their nerves stretched taut to the extreme. However, Ji Tianqing was still calm and did not make a move. A quarter of an hour passed. The world was still silent. Ji Tianqing seemed to have disappeared. The Meng Shuai was slightly tired and irritated. He was even angrier. The more than 2,000 soldiers also began to look at each other in dismay and began to discuss secretly via voice transmission. Where is that coward? Why is there no movement after such a long time? Could it be that he knew that he was not strong enough and that we outnumbered him, so he secretly escaped? That's very likely. With the Meng Shuai here and more than 2,000 of us, whoever shows up will die. Who do you think would be so bold as to kill the Meng Shuai halfway? In the entire boundless heaven continent, I guess it's only Kenshin. But Kenshin has just left Yenshu's cave and is still on his way. How could he appear here? Yes. Even if Kenshin can travel thousands of miles in a second, he can't possibly get here in 2 days. Since the soldiers began to discuss secretly, they naturally let down their guard. The Meng Shuai also began to curse and insult Ji Tianqing. He wanted to provoke Ji Tianqing and force him to show up. Seeing that the time was right, Ji Tianqing quietly approached the second black warship and made his move. This time, in order to not be discovered by the Meng Shuai, he only made one move with his sword. Sword of Apocalypse. He drew on the vast power of the world and made a giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long. It only took him 1/5 of an instant to make this move. After making the move, he retracted his aura and quickly retreated to the edge of the formation. As a result, the Meng Shuai did not have the chance to lock onto his tracks and aura, let alone identify him. Kaboom! The giant divine sword that was thousands of feet long struck the black warship with the power to destroy everything. In the deafening sound, the black warship that was 8,000 feet long was swallowed by the golden sword light and shattered into pieces. Hundreds of millions of pieces of metal mixed with the flesh and blood of hundreds of Sir gods sprinkled in the air. After destroying the divine warship, the power of the Sword of Apocalypse did not diminish. It struck the ground again. Coincidentally, the remaining half of the divine warship that fell on the ground was also struck by the sword light and shattered into pieces. Amidst the loud rumbling, a 6,000-mile-long ravine was cut open on the ground, and sand and dust were sent flying into the air. The power of this sword was actually so terrifying. Not only did it destroy a warship, but it also killed more than 700 Sir gods and dozens of King of gods. It also turned the battlefield into ruins. The few divine kings and more than 40 divine lords who were lucky enough to survive were covered in blood. They were in an extremely wretched state. They passed through the debris weakly and desperately ran toward the Meng Shuai and the others. Meng Shuai and more than 30 divine kings and more than 1,000 divine lords revealed a look of shock. They were both shocked and furious. They could not imagine how powerful the ambusher was to be able to use such a powerful divine power. Even the Meng Shuai could not do it. Therefore, he felt even more uneasy. An incredulous thought appeared in his mind. Chapter 4088. Kenshin. It's you. It must be you. Am I right? The furious and shocked Meng Shuai couldn't help but roar at the empty sky. However, he also felt that this idea was ridiculous and completely unbelievable. However, he couldn't think of anyone other than Kenshin who could have such terrifying means. The soldiers heard Meng Shuai's roar in disbelief. Many of them had strange expressions on their faces. After all, it was too absurd and unbelievable. However, Ji Tianqing had hidden himself and never showed up. Not even his shadow could be seen. No one could verify whether the Meng Shuai was telling the truth or not. The 2 black warships had been destroyed, leaving only the Meng Shuai's warship in the sky. Of the 2,400 soldiers, there were only about 1,500 left. Many of them were seriously injured, and they looked to be in a very sorry state. Earlier, they were confident that victory was within their grasp. Now, they were panicking. If they could see their opponent, even if it was really Kenshin, they wouldn't be so panicked. However, the fear of the unknown was the most terrifying. Up until now, the Meng Shuai had lost more than 800 soldiers. They didn't even know who their opponent was. Wasn't that terrifying enough? Of course, what happened earlier couldn't be considered a battle. The enemy had only launched a sneak attack. The Meng Shuai and his soldiers couldn't fight back at all. This was too depressing. However, no matter how panicked and aggrieved they were, they couldn't run away. Moreover, they were all sealed by the five-colored light shield. They couldn't escape. The Meng Shuai was still present and hadn't made a move. No one dared to run away. Thus, the two sides were in a stalemate. The world returned to silence. Ji Tianqing seemed to have disappeared again. The atmosphere became even heavier. Everyone's hearts were heavy. Half an hour later, Meng Shuai and the soldiers under his command were once again impatient and unable to maintain their composure. However, they had learned their lesson this time. Everyone knew that the ambusher was still hiding in the dark and hadn't left. After careful consideration, the Meng Shuai decided to change its strategy. If this continued, the first to collapse would definitely be the soldiers under his command. After all, the Heaven and Earth Great Formation within a radius of 10,000 miles was still operating, constantly exerting pressure. The divine power of more than 1,500 soldiers was being drained at every moment. If the stalemate continued for 2 or 3 days, these soldiers would have exhausted all their strength and would not have any fighting strength left. Meng Shuai calculated in his mind. The previous 3 attacks were to create chaos and divert Benshuai's attention. In fact, his real goal was to rescue Nangong Ao. As long as Benshuai kept a close eye on Nangong Ao, there was nothing he could do. Moreover, even if he was a Kenshin, he wouldn't dare face Benshuai and his 1,000 soldiers head-on. He's been hiding in the dark all this time. Benshuai can't catch him, so he can only break the formation first. With this in mind, the Meng Shuai made up his mind and decisively issued an order. Except for the 4 generals piloting the warship, everyone else is to leave the warship and protect it. Especially near the gap. Send more people to keep an eye on the hostage. Thus, all the soldiers left the warship and guarded it with their weapons. Another 5 god kings led 200 monarchs to reinforce the gap, surrounding it so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The secret room where Nangong Ao was imprisoned became the target of everyone's vigilance. Next, the Meng Shuai ordered the 4 generals piloting the warship to fly slowly. The Meng Shuai personally took the lead and escorted the warship to the 5-colored dome in the north with over 1,000 soldiers. In this way, more than 500 soldiers guarded the gap in the warship while over 1,000 soldiers protected the warship. The Meng Shuai personally used his divine arts to observe the structure and veins of the sealing formation and think of a way to break it. Using offense as defense was indeed a good strategy. If Ji Tianqing continued to be in a stalemate, the Meng Shuai would be able to break the formation and lead the soldiers to escape. If Ji Tianqing lost his cool and attacked the warship, he would be besieged by over 1,000 soldiers. In short, the Meng Shuai had the upper hand again. However, a problem soon arose. 15 minutes later, the Meng Shuai roughly saw the structure and veins of the formation. He had thought it was just a high-grade king-level divine formation. But in fact, it was a supreme-grade king-level divine formation. Even if Benshuai were to personally set up a supreme-grade divine formation, it would take at least 10 days to half a month. Could it be that the ambushers knew that Benshuai would pass by here half a month ago? That's ridiculous. The Meng Shuai's expression was ugly. His brows were tightly knitted together, unable to relax. Through this supreme-grade king-level divine formation, he realized how terrifying his opponent was. He increasingly suspected that the ambushers hiding in the dark were Kenshin. No matter how ridiculous or unbelievable the answer was, he had to accept it. However, he put aside the question of who the ambushers were for now. His top priority was to find a way to break the formation as soon as possible. 360 million meridians, 36 million nodes, and at least 360 array bases. Such a complex and profound formation, Ben Shui would have to deduce tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of times to find a way to break it. As he focused on observing the formation, the Meng Shui felt a headache and a sense of helplessness. If he had seen this array before, or if he had deciphered this array before, then it would be fine. At the very least, he would be able to quickly determine the direction to break the formation and choose the correct one from thousands of methods. However, this formation was unfamiliar. He had never come into contact with it before. He could not find a way to break the formation, so he could only deduce and calculate over and over again. He was a peak divine king with an extremely powerful sea of consciousness. He could deduce 3 to 5 times in 15 minutes. However, if he had to deduce tens of millions of times, it would take him years. Unless he was extremely lucky, he would not be able to find the correct way to break the formation after a few hundred tries. Or, if he was so lucky, he would be able to find the correct solution after 2 or 3 tries. Ji Tianqing hid in the dark and observed. He was troubled by the fact that the Meng Shui was so focused on studying the formation and more than 1,000 soldiers were on high alert. If he tried to stop the Meng Shui, he would be besieged by the soldiers. However, if he didn't stop them, if Meng Shui managed to break the formation, these people would be able to escape. Fortunately, he knew that the Meng Shui's formation skills were ordinary, so he was confident in the great formation of heaven and earth. The Meng Shui would not be able to break the formation for at least 2 or 3 days. However, he had a misgivings. He was worried that the Meng Shui would threaten him with Nangong Ao's life and force him to open the formation. Given the Meng Shui's temperament, this was very likely. Therefore, Ji Tianqing could not wait any longer. He had to act. Sword rain. While the Meng Shui was not paying attention, he suddenly erupted with all his strength and used his ultimate killing move. In an instant, tens of thousands of silver lights lit up the sky and fell like a meteor shower. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. These were 90,000 giant swords made of stars. They descended from the sky with the power to destroy everything. Chapter 4089. The Meng Shui's attention was focused on the array. More than 1,000 soldiers were on high alert as they stared at the gap in the battleship and the sky around the battleship. However, they didn't expect that Ji Tianqing's next attack wasn't a sword light, but a fist light. Instead, it was tens of thousands of giant swords that fell from the sky. Before the sword light arrived, the destructive power had already descended and enveloped everyone. Countless soldiers were filled with fear as they subconsciously looked up at the sky. Everyone's scalp tingled when they saw the densely packed starry swords. Feeling the terrifying power of the starry swords, everyone was filled with fear and horror. They almost turned around and fled. Even the Meng Shui, who was focused on studying the array, was shocked by the power of tens of thousands of starry swords and subconsciously looked up at the sky. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing did not hesitate and teleported to the gap in the battleship. There were more than a dozen god kings and more than 200 Sir gods blocking his way. He wanted to pass through the gap in the battleship and enter the battleship to rescue Nangong Ao. He had to break through their blockade. Therefore, he made a prompt decision and brandished his divine sword, slashing out 9 golden sword lights towards the crowd in front of him. The dozen god kings and more than 200 Sir gods were looking up at the starry swords in the sky. They were filled with fear and panic. They were unprepared. Ji Tianqing did not hide his tracks and aura and directly launched his attack. After all, success or failure depended on this move. As long as he could successfully enter the battleship and rescue Nangong Ao, Ji Tianqing was not afraid of exposing his identity and tracks. Bang bang bang. Before the god kings and sir gods could react, they were enveloped by the golden sword lights. Following a series of dull explosions, the golden lights flashed in the crowd and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Not only were there dozens of sir gods, but there were also 7 middle-level god kings and a 7th-level high-level god king. They were all killed by the golden sword lights. When Ji Tianqing unleashed his sword Dao divine ability with all his might, even a 7th stage realm high-level god king would be instantly killed. However, not only were the middle-level god kings and sir gods killed physically, their godheads were also shattered. That high-level god king's body was destroyed, and his godhead was severely damaged, but he survived. Ji Tianqing tore a hole in the defensive line formed by everyone, and without hesitation, he went through the hole and entered the warship. At this moment, the others reacted. The Meng Shuai also let out a roar and rushed over murderously. He finally found Ji Tianqing's tracks and locked onto the aura of Ji Tianqing's soul. When he confirmed that the ambusher was Kenshin, his heart was filled with shock and disbelief. This caused him to be stunned for a moment. But in that instant, the ending was changed. Rumble. In the next moment, 90,000 star swords descended like dense raindrops, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. Everyone and the Meng Shuai's warships were hit by countless starry swords. The Meng Shuai was the strongest among them. The starry swords could not hurt him, but they were able to trap him. He could not escape, so he could only use his defensive divine powers to block the attacks of the swords. More than 1,000 soldiers suffered. Under the bombardment of the swords, blood and flesh splattered everywhere, and they screamed in agony. The heaven and earth formation within a radius of 10,000 miles had completely turned into a silver ocean, filled with 90,000 star swords. It was chaos. Even though everyone knew that Ji Tianqing had rushed into the warship and was crazily hacking at the defensive array of the secret chamber, no one could stop him. After all, the starry swords were too powerful. Even the Meng Shuai could not escape, let alone the others. Bang! 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 Inside the warship, Ji Tianqing swung his divine hammer as fast as lightning and smashed the door of the secret chamber. Not far from his feet, 2 high-level divine lords had already been reduced to a pile of flesh and blood. He had killed the 2 guards as soon as he entered the warship. Then, in order to save time and break the defense of the secret chamber as soon as possible, he did not use the sword of burial of heaven. Instead, he took out the divine hammer. The supreme grade king level divine artifact was indeed extraordinary. Boom! 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 The superior king level divine array that sealed the secret chamber was soon shattered. Crack! Kaboom! Along with the sound of shattering, layer after layer of defensive formations were smashed into pieces, bursting into balls of divine light fragments. If Ji Tianqing hadn't forcefully destroyed the array formations, he would have needed a quarter of an hour to break them no matter how high his attainments in the array Dao were. However, he used the divine hammer to attack with all his might. In just 3 breaths, he had destroyed all the layers of array formations. Finally, he smashed the door of the secret chamber with the last blow. The door made of God King level metal was dented and fell to the ground with a loud clang. Swish! Ji Tianqing stepped through the door as fast as lightning and rushed into the secret room. The secret chamber was 50 feet wide and dark. It was cold and bone-chilling. The floor was engraved with array patterns, and they were glowing with dark divine light. A bronze obelisk stood in the middle of the floor. A deity clan man in ragged clothes and covered in blood was chained to the obelisk. The chains were all specially made king-level divine artifacts. They pierced through the man's shoulder blades and ribs, and locked his wrists and ankles. Not only did the chains bind his body, but they also restricted his divine power. The array on the floor was still operating, and it also sealed his divine power. His hair was disheveled, and he was covered in wounds and blood. It was obvious that he had been tortured. Even though there was such a big commotion outside, and Ji Tianqing rushed into the secret chamber, he still kept his head down and did not react. Ji Tianqing reached out and brushed away the man's blood-stained hair. Only then did he see the almost deformed face covered in blood. It was Nangong Ao. Apparently, Nangong Ao was half dead after being tortured. He was in a coma. Ji Tianqing's heart clenched as he watched. Anger surged in his chest, and his killing intent rose. Nangong Ao, wake up. He slapped Nangong Ao's cheeks and tried to wake him up. Unfortunately, Nangong Ao's injuries were too severe. He could not wake up, and his breathing was very weak. Ji Tianqing did not dare to waste any time. He quickly swung the divine hammer and destroyed the array on the floor. Then, he used the divine hammer to break the chains that bound Nangong Ao. Nangong Ao was finally saved, but he could not stand up. He fell straight to the ground. Ji Tianqing did not hesitate to catch him and put him into the distorted time and space of Jiutian Tenju Tower. He handed him over to Yunyao, Chao Qingyu, and the others for treatment. At this point, he had successfully saved Nangong Ao. Even if his identity was exposed, and he had to face more than 1,000 experts alone, he was not afraid. He had no more worries. When he left the battleship and returned to the sky with the divine hammer in his left hand and the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand, his body was already burning with blood flames. Those flames were condensed from anger and killing intent. They soared into the sky and were terrifying. At this time, the 90,000 starry giant swords gradually dissipated. Outside the shattered battleship, everything within a radius of 10,000 miles had become scorched ruins. It was a tragic scene. Chapter 4090. The 90,000 star swords wreaked havoc in the formation for 5 breaths of time. In just 5 breaths, the world within 10,000 miles was shattered and filled with blood and gore. When the stellar swords rained down, more than 800 divine lords and 10 godly kings were killed in the first wave. Their bodies were reduced to smithereens, and their godheads were shattered as well. Meng Shuai and many godly kings defended themselves with their arts and destroyed a few thousand stellar swords. But their efforts were futile. The remaining more than 80,000 starry swords shuttled back and forth in the sky, slaughtering everything in their way. As a result, over 500 divine lord experts and over a dozen divine king experts died tragically under the mincing of the 10,000 huge swords. Not even their corpses remained. Even Meng Shuai's warship was destroyed after more than 20,000 attacks. Along with a series of cracking noises, the 1,000-foot-long battleship was torn apart, turning into pieces that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, scattering in the ruins. At this moment, all the stellar swords were gone. The sky became empty. Only Ji Tianqing, Meng Shuai, the 7 wounded and blood-stained god kings, and over 20 god monarchs who were lucky enough to survive were left. Of course, the survival of the 20 divine lords had nothing to do with their strength. It was pure luck. But their injuries were so severe that they could barely participate in the battle. The two sides faced off in the sky, staring at each other in silence. Killing intent filled the air. At this moment, Ji Tianqing no longer concealed his tracks and aura. This was the first time Meng Shuai and the others had seen him clearly since the battle began. After a while, it was Meng Shuai who spoke first. Kenshin. I didn't expect it to be you. Meng Shuai had participated in the battle where Kenshin had fallen. He had also attacked Kenshin with the Azura God Emperor. Therefore, he would never forget Kenshin's appearance and divine soul aura. At this time, Ji Tianqing's divine soul aura was the same as before, and his appearance was also 90% similar. Meng Shuai had mixed feelings when he said this. He was shocked, angry, and a little scared. After all, the Kenshin's reputation was too great. Even after 1,000 years, it still hadn't weakened. Ji Tianqing stared at the Meng Shuai with bloodshot eyes and said with a murderous look, Who else can kill you bastards other than me? Who else could lead the people of the world to destroy Azura's dark reign? Meng Shuai, I haven't seen you in 1,000 years. You've become a peak divine king, and your courage has grown. Azura isn't in the god realm, yet you're still dreaming of killing me. What a joke. Meng Shuai was so humiliated that he gnashed his teeth and roared, Long Tian. No matter how great your fame is, you're also merely a peak divine king. Ben Shuai and the imperial tutor are both peak divine kings, and they control the entire boundless heaven continent. Why can't they kill you? No matter how strong you are, no matter how confident you are, you still have to rely on schemes and tricks. Do you dare to fight Ben Shuai's 2,000 soldiers head-on and fight to the death? Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully, schemes and tricks are your and the imperial tutor's forte. If you weren't so despicable, why would I be here? Meng Shuai couldn't refute him, so he changed the topic and asked with confusion, I still don't understand. How could you be here? Of course, he wouldn't ask how Kenshin could arrive here in just 2 days after leaving Yanshu's cave. Now, he could vaguely guess the answer. Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, the Kenshin that just departed from Yanshu's cave was actually my doppelganger. It was just an act to numb you. I knew it. This answer confirmed Meng Shuai's conjecture, and he suddenly realized. Just as he had guessed, the real Kenshin had departed long ago. Kenshin guessed that he had planted spies in Yanshu's cave, and purposely left a doppelganger to numb him. Brilliant. I have to say, your schemes are better than Ben Shuai's. Meng Shuai admired him from the bottom of his heart. At the same time, he realized that Kenshin was different from before. Kenshin was arrogant and confident. Although he was strong, he had obvious weaknesses. Kenshin in front of him was, of course, more difficult to deal with. But Ben Shuai still can't believe it. It's only been a few days since Ben Shuai captured Nangong Ao. How could you get here from Yanshu's cave in 5 days? Moreover, you calculated the route and time Ben Shuai would return to the domain of true martial and set up a formation here in advance. Even though Meng Shuai knew the answer, he still found it hard to believe. In his opinion, Ji Tianqing's speed was already terrifying for him to be able to get here. To be able to calculate his route back to the domain of true martial meant that Ji Tianqing was shrewd enough, and his deduction ability was superb. However, to set up a king-level formation here in advance was too illogical. Even if you're the best formation master, it would still take you 5 to 6 days to set up such a formation. Seeing Meng Shuai's confused and shocked expression, Ji Tianqing sneered, it's because I can do things that ordinary people can't believe, and create miracles time and time again, that I'm worthy of the name Kenshin. Otherwise, how do you think I can command the heroes and conquer the vast heaven continent? He did not waste his breath explaining to Meng Shuai. In his eyes, Meng Shuai was already a dead man. When Meng Shuai heard his words, he felt that it was very reasonable. He frowned and pondered. Ji Tianqing did not waste any more time. He raised the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, pointed at Meng Shuai and the others, and said, didn't you just say that you want to fight to the death with me? As you wish, let's fight to the death. Let me see if you've made any progress in the past 1,000 years. As soon as he finished speaking, his body emitted a golden light, and an earth-shattering power erupted. He waved the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand, and slashed out 8 sacred sword rays toward the god kings and god emperors. He waved the divine hammer with his left hand, and used all of his power to smash at Meng Shuai. In an instant, a fierce wind blew, and dust and sand swirled. Terrifying murderous intent filled the area for thousands of miles. The 7 injured god kings and more than 20 god emperors were intimidated by his murderous intent and power, and they all retreated. Meng Shuai could not retreat. He could only grit his teeth and fight back with the divine saber in both hands. Collapse of 1,000 mountains. Meng Shuai roared. He held the divine saber with both hands and slashed out 18 sword rays. The 7 god kings and more than 20 god emperors saw that it was useless to retreat, and they were about to be swallowed by the sword rays, so they all counterattacked. They had a strong desire to survive, so they used their trump cards to block the sword rays at all costs. In the next moment, the sky full of divine light and shadows collided violently in the sky, causing an earth-shattering explosion. Bang! 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 Rumble! Amidst the loud noise, blood splattered everywhere. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Miserable cries rang out one after another. It was extremely miserable. More than 20 injured Sir Gods were smashed to smithereens on the spot. None of them survived. Even out of the 7 God Kings, 4 of them were slain. Chapter 4091. In the blink of an eye, another 4 godly kings and more than 20 godly emperors were slain by Ji Tianqing. Of the Meng Shuai's soldiers, only 3 godly kings were left. They were covered in blood and looked miserable. In less than an hour, out of the 2,400 soldiers, only 3 god kings remained. No one could imagine what had happened during this time. Even the Meng Shuai, who had seen the entire process with his own eyes, found it hard to believe. Ji Tianqing had single-handedly killed nearly 2,400 soldiers. This was too preposterous and too terrifying. When Ji Tianqing killed the 20 godly emperors and 4 godly kings, the Meng Shuai had thought of stopping him. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing's full-powered hammer restrained him. He dared not be careless and could only use all his strength to defend himself. Only then did he barely manage to block the hammer's bombardment. Even so, he was sent flying 10 miles away. He had to gasp for breath for a while before he could calm his chaotic divine power. As for protecting the godly kings and godly kings under his command, he was powerless. At this point, the Meng Shuai was keenly aware of Ji Tianqing's terrifying strength. He was already terrified. He finally understood where Kenshin's courage came from to command the heroes and rise up against the Azura God Emperor. With Kenshin's terrifying strength, no one could do anything to him unless the 5 God Emperors came in person. Even though the Meng Shuai was now a peak godly king, he could only look up to Kenshin. He was no match for him. This was because he knew that there was a huge gap between peak godly kings. Die. Ji Tianqing was not like the Meng Shuai, who would have such thoughts in the face of death. He locked onto the Meng Shuai's aura and swung his hammer again. He also sent out 3 beams of sword light at the 3 godly kings. The 3 godly kings were all Meng Shuai's trusted generals. Normally, they were all powerhouses who could move unhindered and command the wind and the clouds. At this moment, they were already heavily injured. Their bodies were covered in blood, and they were in a very sorry state. When the 3 destructive sword lights came, they didn't dare to cast any spells to block them. They could only run for their lives. They had wanted to teleport away, but the area within a radius of 10,000 miles had been sealed off by the array. The space had also been confined, making it impossible for them to teleport. Helpless, they could only retreat and fly away. However, their speed was not fast enough, and they were quickly caught up by the 3 sword lights. Pang pang pang. Another series of muffled sounds rang out as the 3 god kings were struck by the sword light. Blood splattered everywhere. Their divine bodies were destroyed, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood that scattered from the sky. 3 divine deities flew out, burning with divine flames. They erupted with the fastest speed, fleeing in all directions. Their divine bodies were destroyed, but they were lucky enough to survive. However, his godhead had also been severely damaged, and cracks had appeared on it. Even though the area within a radius of 10,000 miles had been sealed off and they had nowhere to run, they could only swim around the periphery of the Great Array. However, their strong desire to survive drove them to fly away quickly. They didn't dare to stop. Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time chasing after the three divine deities. He had just sent the Meng Shuai flying with his hammer. At this moment, the Meng Shuai had retreated 100 miles away. He was panting violently and raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Ji Tianqing took advantage of the situation to chase after the Meng Shuai. He teleported to the front of the Meng Shuai and wielded the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven at the same time. The mountain-like thunderbolts and the earth-shattering golden sword lights drowned out the Meng Shuai's figure. The Meng Shuai was terrified. He knew that he couldn't dodge, so he could only hold his treasured sword with both hands and block with all his might. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering noise, the three golden sword lights hit him hard, and golden fragments burst into the sky. The three sword lights all collapsed, and a destructive shockwave burst out. However, the Meng Shuai was also knocked away, and the treasured sword in his hand was thrown away. Then, a lightning ball the size of a mountain fell from the top of his head with an incomparably violent divine power. Without his weapon and his divine power, the Meng Shuai had no time to dodge the attack. At this critical moment, he roared angrily. He ignored the backlash of his divine power and used all his strength to form a protective shield. Swoosh! The moment the thunderbolts hit him, his body was covered by a layer of oval-shaped colorful shield. It protected him like an eggshell. The shield wasn't very big, only about 3 meters tall. However, the Meng Shuai unleashed his full potential and released his most powerful divine power to form such a small shield. Its defensive power was also increased by several times. Kaboom! Unfortunately, no matter how strong his shield was, it couldn't withstand the thunderbolts. In the deafening noise, his shield was smashed into pieces, and he was swallowed by the thunderbolts. He fell from the sky and smashed into the ruins with a thud. The scorched earth had been smashed into a deep pit with a radius of hundreds of meters. Dust flew up into the air. When the Meng Shuai got up from the pit, his body was charred black and smoking. He was unrecognizable. His crown had been shattered, and his hair was fluffy like a bird's nest. He looked terrible. Moreover, his internal and external injuries were very serious. His divine power was completely disordered, and his consciousness was a little blurry. After being severely injured, his combat power had decreased by more than half. He quickly took out a few divine elixirs and tried to heal himself. However, Ji Tianqing didn't give him a chance to breathe. He picked up the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven again and charged at him fiercely. Seeing the divine hammer shooting out nearly 100 thunderbolts and dozens of sword lights, the Meng Shuai was terrified. Stop! Kenshin, don't kill Ben Shuai. The Meng Shuai knew he couldn't resist. If he was hit by the thunderbolts and sword lights, even if he didn't die, his divine body would be destroyed. Therefore, he roared at the top of his lungs, trying to negotiate with Ji Tianqing. If you kill Ben Shuai, the entire boundless heaven continent will fight you to the death. Don't even think about knowing our plan. After thinking about it, he didn't seem to have anything to threaten Ji Tianqing with. He could only come up with these two reasons. However, Ji Tianqing turned a deaf ear to his words. The thunderbolts and sword lights didn't slow down at all. They immediately engulfed the Meng Shuai's figure. The moment before the Meng Shuai's body was destroyed, he heard Ji Tianqing's reply. If I kill you, I will still know everything. That's right. After killing the Meng Shuai, Ji Tianqing could refine his quintessence fragments and extract his divine soul memories. In this way, he could even avoid torture and negotiation. He could get all the information he wanted. Meng Shuai immediately reacted and also thought of this point. But it was too late. Bang! 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 Hundreds of thunderbolts and dozens of sword lights exploded with destructive power, cutting the Meng Shuai into pieces on the spot. In an earth-shattering explosion, flesh and blood splattered, and divine light splashed in all directions. The Meng Shuai didn't even have time to scream before he was reduced to ashes. Even his quintessence was severely damaged, and several cracks appeared on it. He barely managed to stay awake. His quintessence burned with flames as he ran north as fast as he could. Chapter 4092. However, the array was still in place. Meng Shuai's godhead could not escape the seal of the array, just like the three superior god kings. However, he could not stay in the array. He had to escape even if it meant risking his life. Whoosh! Meng Shuai's walnut-sized diamond-shaped godhead blazed with 5 colored flames as it slammed into the 5-colored light wall in the north like a shooting star. As long as he could break through the light wall, he would have a chance to survive even if he was on his last breath. The other 3 god kings' godheads had been circling the edge of the array, full of fear. When they saw Meng Shuai leading the charge, they were overjoyed. They hurriedly followed Meng Shuai to the north. If they did not fight, they would die here anyway. Rather than that, they might as well take a gamble with Meng Shuai. If Meng Shuai could break through the 5-colored light wall, they would be saved. If even Meng Shuai could not break through, they would have nothing to say but accept their fate. Boom! In the next moment, Meng Shuai's godhead, which was as fast as a shooting star, crashed into the 5-colored light wall with a loud bang. The 5-colored light barrier within a radius of thousands of kilometers shook violently from the impact, creating layers of ripples in the air. Divine light and countless fragments of light burst out from the point of impact. Meng Shuai's all-out attack was indeed powerful. A few cracks appeared on the 5-colored light wall, and a series of cracking noises could be heard from it. Unfortunately, there were only cracks on the wall of light and it didn't shatter. And the incomparably powerful rebounding force sent Meng Shuai flying out backward. 2 more cracks appeared on his godhead, his injuries worsened, and his consciousness blurred. When the 3 god kings behind him saw that the situation was bad, they could not stop even if they wanted to. At this critical moment, they could only force themselves to change direction and scatter to the sides, brushing against the 5-colored light wall. They had failed this time. This also indicated that they would die without a doubt. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing arrived soon after. He slashed at Meng Shuai's godhead with his sword. Meng Shuai was at the end of his tether. He was barely conscious and could not fight. He didn't even have the chance to dodge as he was struck by those sword lights. Kaboom! There was an earth-shattering explosion. Meng Shuai's godhead shattered into a dozen pieces and scattered in the sky. A peak god king, the right-hand man of the Azura god emperor, and the second most powerful person on the boundless heaven continent, had fallen. When the other 3 god kings saw this scene, they were dumbfounded. Their minds went blank. For hundreds of years, Meng Shuai had been a lofty, powerful, and wise leader and overlord in their hearts. They regarded Meng Shuai as their idol, their pillar, and their pillar of support. They had never thought that there would be a day when Meng Shuai would die so tragically. They could not believe it, and they were unwilling to accept it. After all, Meng Shuai had been killed by Ji Tianqing. There was no way they could escape from this formation. They were doomed. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing waved his hand and grabbed Meng Shuai's godhead fragment, and he put it away. Then, he carried the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven and flew toward the godheads of the 3 god kings. The 3 god kings finally came to their senses. They were scared out of their wits and fled desperately. Unfortunately, their speed was nothing compared to Ji Tianqing's. Ji Tianqing teleported and caught up with one of the god king's godheads. He raised his sword and cut it into pieces. He waved his hand and collected the scattered godhead fragments. Then, he teleported 8,000 miles and appeared in another direction. He caught up with another god king. Crack! Another slash and the god king's godhead was also cut into pieces. The 3rd god king's godhead fragment did not escape the fate and was killed 3 breaths later. At this point, the battlefield finally quieted down. Ji Tianqing was the only one left. The 2,400 elite soldiers, including Meng Shuai, had all been killed by Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's operation this time had come to a successful conclusion. He was not in a hurry to leave. He put away the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven and began to clean up the battlefield. The area within 10,000 miles had been reduced to ruins. There were pits and ravines everywhere. The wreckage of the 3 divine warships, the bones of more than 2,000 soldiers, and the broken armor and weapons were scattered in the ruins. Of course, there were also their space rings and godhead fragments. Ji Tianqing only wanted to clean up the battlefield and count the spoils. He first collected more than 50 God King godhead fragments, then he collected more than 2,000 spatial rings. After doing all this in an hour, he waved his hand and struck the ground. Suddenly, the ruins within 10,000 miles surged with huge waves and completely reversed. All the wreckage, fragments, and traces were buried by the soil. The ground was also restored to its original level. Ji Tianqing then cast a spell to remove the formation and retrieve the 36 divine weapons that were scattered around. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! One by one, the divine weapons flew out from the bottom of the lake. They flew across the sky and returned to Ji Tianqing's hands. When the 36 divine weapons were all retrieved, the 5-colored light shield within 10,000 miles dissipated. Walala, the emerald lake water that was blocked outside by the 5-colored light shield suddenly surged and quickly filled up the empty space within 10,000 miles. Not long after, this place was submerged by the lake. When the lake returned to its calm state, all traces were covered as if nothing had happened. At this time, Ji Tianqing had already stepped on the road back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. He was still driving the deity-slaying warship, flying high in the sky at lightning speed. Of course, this time he was not in a hurry to save people, so he did not go all out. This could save a lot of cultivation resources. Even if the deity-slaying warship was sailing at its normal speed, it was still 3 times faster than a peak divine king. In the cockpit of the warship, a few formations were operating normally. Ji Tianqing did not have time to check the spoils of war. He was worried about Nangong Ao's injuries. He took out the Jiutian Shiju Tower and entered the distorted spacetime. Swoosh! After a while, when he returned to the bottom of the Shuyan sacred tree, he saw Yunyao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Lan, and the others gathered together to discuss something. He quickly walked over and saw everyone surrounding a cold jade bed. Nangong Ao, who was unconscious, was lying quietly on the bed. Previously, Nangong Ao's hair was disheveled and his body was covered in blood. He looked very miserable. At this moment, he was still covered in wounds. However, the blood and disheveled hair on his body had been cleaned up. Ji Tianqing could see that everyone was very attentive to Nangong Ao. They did not hesitate to use their divine power to clean up his blood. Tianqing, you're back. Brother Tianqing, did you defeat the Meng Shuai? At this moment, everyone saw Ji Tianqing return. They raised their heads and looked at him with concern. Although they did not show up, they did not help Ji Tianqing in the battle. However, they knew that Ji Tianqing's mission was dangerous and difficult. They were worried for him. Now that they saw him return safely without any injuries, everyone was completely relieved. Chapter 4093. Ji Tianqing used his divine sense to check on Nangong Ao's condition and asked everyone what had happened. After he handed Nangong Ao over to everyone, they ended their cultivation and did their best to treat Nangong Ao. Yunyao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others took turns to use divine techniques to help Nangong Ao control his injuries and replenish his divine power. Chao Qingyu was more attentive and even used his divine power to clean Nangong Ao's long hair and blood. Now, Nangong Ao's injuries were basically stable and his life was no longer in danger. However, his injuries were too severe and his spirit was too weak. He would probably sleep for another 10 days to half a month before he woke up. In addition, everyone also gave Nangong Ao a few divine pills to heal his injuries. After the effects of the divine pills were released, Nangong Ao's injuries would heal faster. After knowing this, Ji Tianqing was relieved and said to everyone, "Everyone, thank you for your hard work. Nangong Ao is usually very active. This is the first time I've seen him so quiet and embarrassed. As for Meng Shuai and his soldiers, don't worry, I've killed them all." Hearing this, everyone was shocked at first and then burst into cheers. Everyone was in disbelief. Really? Meng Shuai was a peak supreme god. You killed him so quickly? Didn't the intelligence say that Meng Shuai had more than 2,000 soldiers under his command? Most of them were supreme gods and there were more than 50 supreme gods. Master's ambush strategy this time was too successful. It could be said to be perfect. Ha ha ha. Under the Shura god emperor's command, there were 2 peak supreme gods guarding the boundless heaven continent. One was the imperial tutor and the other was the Meng Shuai. I'm afraid no one would have thought that Meng Shuai would be killed before the real battle even began. Yes. This is what it means to be victorious from the get-go. He killed one of the enemy's leaders in the first clash. The Imperial Preceptor is definitely going to be mad. We have to spread the news as soon as possible and let those ancient clans and forces who are still watching see how powerful our master is. Everyone was talking excitedly. Even Bai Long came to join in the fun. Everyone knew that this news was too exciting. Once it was spread, the entire boundless heaven continent would be shocked. The morale of the Shura god emperor's soldiers would be dealt a fatal blow. The morale of the rebel alliance under Ji Tianqing's command would be boosted and their confidence increased. However, Ji Tianqing waved his hand to stop everyone. Don't worry, the battle has just finished. The whole thing. After all, we have to go through with our act. At the very least, we have to wait until I return to Yenshu's cave before we release this news. Everyone thought Chen made sense. What the world knew was that the God of Swords had just left the cave of Yenshu not long ago and was on his way to the Zhenwu region. If the news of Meng Shuai's death was released now, no one would believe it. At the very least, everyone knew that the Sword God had used his clone to deceive everyone, including the 8 forces of the anti-rebels alliance. Even if Ji Tianqing explained, the 8 forces would not take it to heart. However, no one knew what kind of rumors would spread. In short, this kind of thing would become an unstable factor and be used to sow discord between the rebel alliance. Alright, you guys put in some effort and take good care of Nangong Ao. Bai Long, help me pilot the deity slayer warship. Ji Tianqing planned to check the spoils of war in the distorted spacetime while he was on his way. However, the deity slayer warship needed someone to take care of it. Otherwise, it would be bad if it deviated or something happened. Bai Long gladly agreed and quickly followed Ji Tianqing out of the distorted spacetime and appeared in the cockpit of the warship. In the high-end and exquisite cockpit, the layout was simple and elegant. There were a total of more than 60 divine formations. However, only 8 of them were used to control the warship. Ji Tianqing spent a quarter of an hour to teach Bai Long how to pilot it. Bai Long was very smart. He learned it after just one lesson. Then, he happily piloted the warship and rushed back to the Grotto Heaven according to the planned route. Ji Tianqing returned to the distorted spacetime and began to check the spoils of war. One day later, Ji Tianqing finished checking the spoils of war. Meng Shuai's shards of divinity and 57 deity king's shards were sorted out by him. He had also gone through the interspatial rings of the 58 powerhouses. After a rough estimation, there were more than 30 trillion worth of cultivation resources. However, Ji Tianqing only wanted deity king level cultivation resources, materials, elixirs, and artifacts. The rest were thrown into the heaven-mending pearl for the 5 elements world to devour. After so many years, the divine power storm in the five elements world was still ongoing. There were still about 70% of the endless star crystal cores left. As for the space rings of more than 2,000 Sir Gods, Ji Tianqing only took a cursory look and did not check them one by one. Almost every interspatial ring had billions to tens of billions of cultivation resources stored in it. More than 2,000 space rings added up to more than 40 trillion worth of resources. It would be a pity to throw them away, but these resources were relatively low level. There were very few deity king level treasures. Ji Tianqing did not accept them. Instead, he threw the 2,000 space rings to Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others. These are the spoils of war I picked up when I was cleaning up the battlefield. They are the space rings of those Sir Gods. Take your time to check them. Take whatever you want. Therefore, he threw this tedious task to everyone. Apart from cultivating, there was nothing else for them to do. Even something as boring as checking the space rings was new and interesting to them. Everyone gladly accepted the 2,000 space rings. After taking care of Nangong Ao, they began to search the rings. Although most of the space rings contained ordinary resources, their value was not too high. However, they would occasionally encounter some strange items and valuable treasures. This experience of digging for gold in the sand brought a lot of fun to everyone. While everyone was busy checking the space rings, Ji Tianqing meditated under the sacred tree. While he was recovering his strength, he was quietly planning his future plans. Everything had to be planned before acting. He had to see further ahead than the imperial tutor and plan earlier. Only then could he seize the initiative. For example, his ambush on the Meng Shuai could achieve such a perfect result because he had planned ahead and considered everything thoroughly. Unknowingly, 2 days had passed. The deity-slaying battleship was still in the center of the boundless heaven continent. It was still 2 days away from Yenshu Grotto Heaven. Today was the 14th of April. It was also the day that the Meng Shuai announced that he would kill Nangong Ao in public in the Empire of True Martial Arts. The people of the Empire of True Martial Arts had been waiting for this day with anticipation. Everyone thought that there would be a sea of people outside the gates of the capital. However, when tens of thousands of people ran to the gates at dawn, they found that the gates were tightly shut. The so-called killing of Nangong Ao in public would not happen at all. The confused and doubtful people asked around and realized that the atmosphere in the Empire of True Martial Arts was a little strange. Some of the well-informed experts had already found out the inside story. It was said that something had happened to the Meng Shuai and that he could not return to the domain of true martial on time. Nangong Ao could not be escorted back either. Chapter 4094. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall. Even though Ji Tianqing hadn't leaked any information, even Nangong Buhua and the leaders of the 8 factions had been kept in the dark. However, the ambushers and generals of the realm of true martial quickly sensed that something was amiss. The imperial tutor personally oversaw the realm of true martial and commanded more than 3,000 divine lords and over 100 godly kings to set up an inescapable net. He'd set up dozens of large formations in an area of 100,000 miles, one after another. As long as the Meng Shuai brought more than 2,000 soldiers and escorted Nangong Ao back to the realm of true martial. More than 5,000 divine lords, over 100 godly kings, and 2 peak godly kings. It was easy to imagine that Kenshin wouldn't be able to return alive. However, one day before the Meng Shuai was to return to the realm of true martial, the imperial tutor suddenly couldn't contact him. One day later, not only did he lose contact with the Meng Shuai, but he also didn't return to the realm of true martial on time. He couldn't contact any of the 3 divine warships and 2,000 soldiers under his command. At that time, the imperial tutor realized that something was amiss. In order not to leak any information, he secretly sent a group of experts to the south to search. The result was indisputable. The group of experts split into 3 groups and searched the 3 routes that the Meng Shuai took back to the realm of true martial, but to no avail. From then on, the imperial tutor realized that something had happened to the Meng Shuai, and that the 2,000 soldiers were most likely dead. The 3,000 experts lying in ambush in the realm of true martial also had a bad feeling. Rumors began to spread in the army, and many people secretly discussed it. On the 14th of April, the imperial tutor was certain that the Meng Shuai had most likely been intercepted and killed on his way back. He no longer held out hope that the Meng Shuai could return safely. At the same time, the news spread throughout the realm of true martial, and tens of millions of people fought over it. As a result, the news of Meng Shuai being killed by a mysterious powerhouse spread like wildfire from the Zhenwu domain to the entire boundless heaven continent. In the past 2 months, the top forces of the entire boundless heaven continent had been paying attention to the battle between the Kenshin Rebel Alliance, the Imperial Tutor, and the Meng Shuai. It wasn't just the 18 ancient clans and 36 top forces. Even over 100 domain lords, close to 1,000 God King experts, and billions of civilians were paying attention in discussing this matter. After all, this unprecedented battle was related to the ownership of the boundless heaven continent and also determined the fate and future of hundreds of billions of people. The hundreds of billions of people living in the abyss of suffering naturally leaned towards the Kenshin, hoping that the Kenshin could overthrow the dark reign of the Shura God Emperor and end their suffering. However, these common people had no strength, influence, or status. They also had no right to speak. They could not support Kenshin with their actions, so they could only silently pray for Kenshin. Only the 100 domain lords, 36 top forces, and 18 ancient clans were qualified to participate in this unprecedented battle. Now, before the battle between the Rebel Alliance, the Imperial Tutor, and the Meng Shuai had officially begun, news of Meng Shuai's death had already spread. At first, everyone expressed disbelief when they heard this news. However, when everyone calmed down and thought about it carefully, who would dare to spread rumors and spread news of Meng Shuai's death at this critical juncture? That was a heinous crime that could kill even one's friends and family. Moreover, the news came from the Zhenwu domain, so it was highly credible. As a result, the entire boundless heaven continent was in an uproar. Many top forces, domain lords, and God King experts, as well as billions of civilians, discussed and vied with each other to spread this news. In just 2 short days, this news had spread to every corner of the boundless heaven continent. Almost everyone's first reaction was disbelief, followed by shock and surprise. As long as one was not a fool, one could guess that in the entire boundless heaven continent, who had the courage, speed, and strength to kill the Meng Shuai who was protected by more than 2,000 soldiers. It could only be Kenshin. In fact, no one else in the entire realm of the gods could do it. Only Kenshin could create such a miracle. Most people did not know the inside story, nor did they know that Kenshin had only left the Yenshu Grotto heaven a few days ago. It was impossible for him to kill the Meng Shuai so quickly. 95% of the people only knew that the battle between Kenshin, the Imperial Tutor, and the Meng Shuai had already begun. Moreover, in the first round of battle, Kenshin had emerged victorious. He had killed the Meng Shuai and eliminated one of the 2 leaders of the boundless heaven continent as soon as he made his move. How shocking and morale-boosting was this? Billions of civilians saw the dawn of hope and were filled with confidence and anticipation for Kenshin. From their point of view, Kenshin had dealt a heavy blow to the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai from the very beginning. Next, he would be able to easily sweep across the boundless heaven continent and destroy the Azura God Emperor's forces. When the territorial lords, ancient clans, and top forces heard the news, they were shocked and in disbelief. Their emotions became even more complicated. They knew the inside story and that Kenshin had only left the Yenshu Grotto heaven a few days ago. At this moment, Kenshin should have just arrived at the domain of true martial. However, Kenshin did not even go to the domain of true martial. He had already killed the Meng Shuai a few days ago. This was too bizarre and too horrifying. Could it be that Kenshin had mastered some kind of spatial leap that allowed him to cross half a domain at once? Otherwise, how could he have arrived at the domain of true martial in such a short time, set up an ambush halfway, and successfully killed the Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 soldiers? Everyone knew that the battle was chaotic. Even if Kenshin had killed the Meng Shuai, some of the 2,000 soldiers would have escaped. In fact, the Meng Shuai and the 2,400 soldiers had disappeared. They might have all been killed. This indicated that the sword god must have utilized a ceiling array formation to be able to capture Meng Shuai and the others in one fell swoop. If he had to set up a ceiling formation, it would have taken a lot of time. In that case, it was very likely that Kenshin had mastered the technique to cross half a domain in a single step. This made no sense at all. When the top forces and immortal kings analyzed this, they could not help but gasp. Their hearts were filled with fear and shock. Especially the 100 territorial lords and the forces under the Azura God Emperor. They were deeply uneasy and could not suppress the fear in their hearts. Even the Meng Shuai had been easily killed by Kenshin. If Kenshin's rebel alliance attacked them, who could survive? No one could. The forces that had been wavering on the fence felt the most conflicted. On one hand, they marveled at Kenshin's terrifying strength, and on the other, they regretted not making the decision to join the Kenshin rebel alliance sooner. Otherwise, they would be celebrating excitedly and waiting to share the fruits of their victory. Some of the clan leaders and sect masters gathered their elders and protectors to discuss whether they should join the rebel alliance as soon as possible. After all, this was their last chance. When the final battle between the rebel alliance and the imperial tutor began, it would be too late for them to join. Chapter 4095. To be able to become the top clans and forces in the boundless heaven continent, the leaders must have the corresponding shrewdness. There were many things and reasons that everyone was well aware of. If they did not seize the opportunity this time, they would not be able to join the rebel alliance. After all, the 9 forces led by Kenshin were enough to kill the imperial tutor and destroy the Shura god emperor's forces. What was the use of these forces? If they were in Kenshin's shoes, they would not agree either. Therefore, the leaders and powerhouses of several forces had to make a decision within 2 days. Of course, there were still more than a dozen forces that continued to remain neutral and observe the situation. These people had different ideas. Although they also wanted to overthrow the Shura god emperor's rule and restore the glory and power of the past. However, they would not participate in the war personally to avoid attracting disaster. They did not side with the Shura god emperor because they did not want to be lackeys, grovel, and oppose the Kenshin. They did not side with the Kenshin and join the rebel alliance because they did not want to take the risk of starting a war with the Shura god emperor. Even if they received news that the Kenshin had killed the Meng Shuai, they also knew that the Kenshin was very powerful. However, they knew that even if the Kenshin killed the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor and took control of the boundless heaven continent, it would only be temporary. As long as the Shura god emperor was not dead, he would definitely seek revenge on the Kenshin whenever he returned to the boundless heaven continent. When that time came, Kenshin would most likely be killed by the Shura god emperor. The boundless heaven continent would still be in the hands of the Shura god emperor. The outcome would not change. If the Kenshin was killed, the forces that joined the rebel alliance would not have a good ending. All in all, these forces that remained neutral and observed the situation wanted to protect themselves. No matter how the situation in the boundless heaven continent changed, they only wanted to protect the foundation that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Bai Long drove the deity-slaying warship and sped high in the sky. In another day, the battleship would be able to return to Yenshu's cave. At this moment, a communication jade slip flew from the sky and entered the pilot's cabin. It floated beside the White Dragon, shining brightly. White Dragon knew at a glance that this was a message sent to his master by someone else. However, his master was cultivating in the distorted spacetime of the divine pagoda. The jade slip could not enter the divine pagoda, so his master could not receive it. Of course, the white dragon would not receive the jade slip without permission, nor would it check the information inside. After entering Yenshu Grotto Heaven, the battleship flew across the sky at lightning speed and went straight to the main peak of the Light Palace. When the battleship arrived at the square outside the Light Palace, Nangong Buhua, the 7 patriarchs, Su Balian and the others had been waiting for a long time. Everyone had a smile on their faces. They were excited and warmly welcomed Ji Tianqing back. Ji Tianqing kept the battleship and landed on the square alone. He responded to everyone's greetings and salutes. After the greetings were over, Ji Tianqing did not go to rest. He walked into the Light Palace, surrounded by the crowd. The leaders of the 9 forces gathered in the Light Palace. Ji Tianqing took the opportunity to discuss matters. He first announced the results of the operation and then talked about the next step of the plan. Although I've successfully intercepted and killed Meng Shuai, destroyed more than 2,000 soldiers under his command, and rescued Nangong Ao. The traps and ambushes of the Zhenwu domain have been destroyed. However, this is only the beginning of the war. The enemy has lost their leader, Meng Shuai, the imperial tutor, patrol commander Qi Yan, and many other divine king experts. Especially Qi Yan. He and Meng Shuai split up and captured the 8th elder in the northwest. They then beheaded the 8th elder in public. Not only do we have to save Nangong Ao, but we also have to avenge the 8th elder. Moreover, Qi Yan is also at the top of the death list. He is one of the targets that must be eliminated. Therefore, I will depart today to kill Qi Yan. No one expected Ji Tianqing to announce the next step of the plan without discussing it with the others. However, if he could kill Meng Shuai, it would be easy for him to kill Qi Yan. However, they still had to express their opinions and show their concern. Alliance Master, you have just returned from a mission. You should rest for 2 days before killing Qi Yan. That's right. You are our leader. You shouldn't put yourself in danger so many times. Everyone is worried about your safety. Alliance Master, I am willing to lead the 4 elders of my clan to follow you into battle. I am also willing to follow you to kill Qi Yan. Chapter 4096. Everyone present was a sly old fox. Of course, they knew how to seize the opportunity to take the credit. Qi Yan was not strong. He was only in the 9th level of the Divine King realm. Many of the experts present were confident that they could kill him. However, Qi Yan was of noble status. He was the commander of the patrol. Killing him would be a great achievement. In Ji Tianqing's death list, Qi Yan was one of the top 5 important figures. The first was the imperial tutor, and the second was the Meng Shuai. If they followed Ji Tianqing to kill Qi Yan, they could help Ji Tianqing and protect his reputation. At the same time, they could get credit for killing Qi Yan. Most importantly, Ji Tianqing had easily killed Qi Yan. Perhaps they didn't even need to do anything to get the credit. Who would not want to take advantage of such an opportunity? Therefore, the patriarchs of the 7 clans and Su Bailian eagerly signed up to go with Ji Tianqing. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing rejected all of them. I have Qi Yan's whereabouts. You don't have to follow me. I can handle it. Don't forget that the mission I gave you is more important. So many days have passed, and there are only a few days left before the deadline. When will your disciples arrive? Hearing Ji Tianqing's question, the clan leaders and clan leaders were stunned for a moment. Then, they explained with a smile. Don't worry, Alliance Master. Our disciples are rushing at full speed. They will definitely arrive at Yenshu's heavenly abode before the deadline. How could we disobey the Alliance leader's orders? Don't worry, Alliance Master. Our clan will also arrive on time. Our disciples are rushing at full speed. They will arrive in 3 days at the latest. The clan leaders all said that their disciples would arrive on time. Ji Tianqing did not urge them anymore. He said in a dignified tone, "It will take me at least 8 days to kill Qi Yan. The deadline will be up in 5 days, and all the members of the Rebel Alliance will be here. When the time comes, you will have to follow the original plan and fight separately. Eliminate the targets and forces on the death list. The performance and contribution of each force will determine the rewards after the war. I hope that everyone can fight for the common goal, and not for selfish reasons. If you think you can hide it from me, then go ahead and try. Don't say that I didn't warn you." His tone was very cold, and the threat in it was self-evident. The faces of all the patriarchs and sect masters stiffened, and a trace of nervousness and shame flashed through their eyes. Although they maintained a smile on the surface and repeatedly said that they did not dare. But in reality, everyone was vigilant in their hearts and hurriedly put away those selfish thoughts. In front of Kenshin, they did not dare to play tricks. Especially since Kenshin had already warned them in public. If they dared to do it again, they would really be cutting themselves off from the Rebel Alliance. At that time, the Kenshin would not welcome them and might even expel them from the Rebel Alliance. They had the mark of the Rebel Alliance and were mortal enemies with the Imperial Tutor. If they offended both sides, they would have nowhere to go and their fates would be miserable. Such a consequence caused every force to be alarmed. Soon, the meeting was over. All the patriarchs, sect masters, and god kings left the meeting hall. Ji Tianqing stayed in the hall and reminded Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang of many things. When they walked out of the hall, the patriarchs and sect masters were not in a hurry to leave. They went to a secluded area and pretended to take a stroll in the garden, but in reality, they were communicating and discussing what had just happened. Before this, everyone thought that Kenshin did not trust us enough and even hid it from us. Everyone was a little angry and wanted to wait for Kenshin to come back so that we could have a heart-to-heart talk with him. But now, everyone can see that Kenshin did not hide this and even reminded everyone in public. Yes. At this point, I am not afraid of everyone blaming me. Actually, how shrewd is Kenshin? How can he not see that everyone has their own selfish motives? In the past, he did not point it out, but this time, since everyone wanted to make things difficult for him, he might as well point it out. So, everyone should settle down and do what they want to do. In that case, Kenshin left everyone some face. Previously, we all had our own selfish motives, so he was unwilling to trust us. If after today, everyone is still like before, I'm afraid Kenshin will be very disappointed. So, everyone, take care of yourselves. Don't have any more unrealistic fantasies. We have already joined the Rebel Alliance. This is something that the entire boundless heaven continent knows. Only by doing things wholeheartedly can we obtain Kenshin's recognition, trust, and reward. Don't forget, when the alliance was established, they talked about basic benefits. Just now, Kenshin also said that after we succeed in quelling the rebels, he will still reward us according to our contributions. That's right. No matter what everyone thinks, our war god clan will not be a burden anymore. From now on, we will earnestly carry out all of Kenshin's orders. Ha! Our Jiang clan has never complained about Kenshin and has always followed orders. The Lan clan is also following orders and is most loyal to Kenshin. Everyone, please don't count our Lan clan in. Previously, it was you guys who were making a ruckus and wanted to ask for an explanation from Kenshin. Our Phoenix clan did not participate. The 7 clan leaders and Su Balian were all shrewd people. They immediately analyzed the situation and knew what to do from now on. Thus, everyone became righteous and loyal to the Sword God, as if they were not going to wallow in the mire with the rest of the Sword Gods. Thus, the 8 factions all had the intention to compete with each other. They all wanted to compete in future missions to see who could make a great contribution and obtain Kenshin's favor. In the Great Light Hall, the door was tightly shut, and only Ji Tianqing, Nangong Buhua, and Nangong Nihuang were in the hall. Nangong Buhua frowned and said worriedly, "Young Master Long, before you came back, the 8 clan leaders and sect leader were still making a ruckus and wanted to ask for an explanation from you. After all, you lied to them before and made them feel that they were not trusted. Just now, you exposed their selfishness in front of everyone and even threatened them. I'm worried." Before he could finish, Ji Tianqing interrupted him and chuckled. "What are you worried about? Are you afraid that they will be disloyal, selfish, and not loyal to the rebel alliance?" Sigh. Nangong Buhua did not say anything and only sighed in agreement. Nangong Nihuang was also a little worried. They don't want to take the risk and lose their own forces, but they want to gain credit. It's really hard to explain. Young Master, our alliance has just been established, and the trust between us still needs to be built up bit by bit. Don't be too hasty. This father and daughter pair had nothing to say about Ji Tianqing, but they were also worried sick about the rebel alliance. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and comforted them. "Don't worry, those 8 guys are not fools and naturally know what to do. They have already joined the rebel alliance and have no way out. The only way out is to follow my orders and do things honestly and do as much as possible. So, your worries are unnecessary. Moreover, I reminded them today because I don't want to punish them after the matter really happens." Chapter 4097. As the saying goes, the ugly things should be said first. Since the rebel alliance had just been formed, Ji Tianqing had to bring up the problem before anything awkward or unpleasant happened. This way, they could avoid dealing with those factions after the matter really happened, which would make it very difficult for everyone. Most importantly, Ji Tianqing's forces, methods, and schemes were all here. Even the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had suffered greatly in his hands, let alone the other 8 forces. Therefore, no one dared to fall out with him and could only obediently follow his orders. After listening to Ji Tianqing's explanation, Nangong Buhua and his daughter heaved a sigh of relief. Since Ji Tianqing was confident that he could defeat those 8 forces, they had nothing to worry about. Then, Nangong Buhua continued to report, "Young Master Long, just before you came back, I received 4 messages." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile as he asked, "It's those forces that waver and watch in the dark, right?" Nangong Buhua quickly nodded and said, "Yes. Yesterday, the news of the Meng Shuai's assassination spread. Today, they eagerly sent a message to express their willingness to join the rebel alliance." Nangong Nihuang curled her lips in disdain and said, "These guys are too arrogant. They think they are very smart, but they are actually a bunch of clowns. Now that they saw you easily kill the Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 experts, they finally made up their minds." Since Nangong Buhua had already said what he wanted to say, he did not make any more comments and asked directly, "Young Master Long, how do you think we should deal with this matter? Do you agree or disagree?" Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "When the rebel alliance was just formed, I already said it. As long as those clans and top forces are willing to help us overthrow the Shura God Emperor, I will not reject them. Of course, I have to agree. However, I am not in a hurry to give them an answer. In the next 2 days, there should be a few more forces that have made up their minds and sent messages to request to join us. When the time comes, we will deal with them together." Nangong Buhua immediately revealed a fox-like smile, as if he understood. He nodded and said, "Okay, let's do as you say. Let's leave them alone first." After hesitating for a moment, he asked again, "Young Master Long, may I ask what kind of treatment do you plan to give those forces if they join the rebel alliance?" Before Ji Tianqing could answer, Nangong Nihuang frowned and said, "They joined later and obviously do not have the determination and sincerity. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "Of course they don't have the qualifications to talk about conditions, but if you want them to work hard, you still have to promise them certain benefits. How about this? I'll grant them a region of land, limited to their respective regions. If they think the conditions are too..." Nangong Buhua said with a playful smile, "Of course. If they want to haggle, then tell them to scram." Being able to get them to join the alliance and obtain a region of land was already good enough. At the very least, they would be able to preserve their foundation after the matter was settled. Those forces that go against us can't even protect their 10,000 years of foundation. Comparing the two, they will be satisfied. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Very good, I will leave this matter to you. Also, I have divided the death list into two and will give it to you now. You will lead those forces to deal with the experts and forces on the first list. I will command those three forces to deal with the second list." Nangong Buhua nodded and asked, "Nangong Ao and the 8th Elder have not collected enough information, and the death list is only 80% complete. What about the remaining 20%? Do we still need to send people to investigate?" "No need." Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "When we fight with the Imperial Tutor, many forces hiding in the dark will jump out. Even if there are some forces hiding very deeply, don't bother about them for now. After we take control of the Boundless Heaven continent, you can slowly investigate and eliminate them. You must know that even if we take control of the Boundless Heaven continent, you will still have many things to do." When Nangong Buhua heard this, not only did he not feel tired, but he also felt flattered and pleasantly surprised. Of course, he understood the meaning behind Ji Tianqing's words. He was clearly saying that after Ji Tianqing took control of the Boundless Heaven continent, he would go to other continents. And as Ji Tianqing's spokesperson, he would take control of the Boundless Heaven continent. What kind of glory and power was this? It also showed how much Ji Tianqing trusted and valued him. How could Nangong Buhua not be excited? Nangong Nihuang was also very smart. She understood Ji Tianqing's deep meaning, and her beautiful eyes couldn't help but light up. She looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of gratitude. Ji Tianqing did not say anything else. He opened the spatial door of the Divine Pagoda and pulled Nangong Ao out of the distorted spacetime. A few days had passed in the outside world, and he had been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for half a year. Although his injuries were still serious, at least he was awake and could recuperate by himself. "I will leave Nangong Ao to you. Let him stay in Yenshu Grotto Heaven to recuperate. After this battle, I will reward him according to his merits." Ji Tianqing handed Nangong Ao to Nangong Buhua and was about to leave the Great Hall of Light. He had told them everything that needed to be told, and now he was going to the northwest to kill the patrol commander, Qi Yan. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang chased after him, wanting to send him out of Yenshu Grotto Heaven. But Ji Tianqing refused, "There is no need to send me out. It is not a good thing to attract attention. Take care of Nangong Ao first, and remember to control the situation." After he finished speaking, he waved at Nangong Buhua and his daughter and flew up into the sky. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang stood outside the palace gate, looking up at his figure. Nangong Ao, who was very weak, also wanted to walk over and send Ji Tianqing off with his eyes. But his injuries were too serious, and he fell down before he could take 2 steps. Nangong Buhua hurriedly helped him up, asked about his injuries, and sent someone to send him back to his residence. Next, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang went to do their own tasks. Although they were worried about Ji Tianqing's safety. But they were not vague about what they should do. They also understood that only by controlling the situation and guarding Yenshu Grotto Heaven, could they avoid Ji Tianqing's worries. Not long after, the leaders of the 8 forces also heard the news of Ji Tianqing's departure. Although they were mentally prepared, Ji Tianqing's eagerness to leave still surprised them. At the same time, they were also a little disappointed. After Ji Tianqing left Yanshu Grotto Heaven, he only told Nangong Buhua and his daughter some things, and did not even greet them. It was clear who was more important and who was more trusted by Ji Tianqing. But they were not jealous, and they knew that it was useless. They secretly made up their minds to make contributions, and let Ji Tianqing see them in a new light. Even though the Shimi Grotto Heaven's intelligence network couldn't find out why Qi Yan had left, or where he had gone. However, after Ji Tianqing received the news, he could roughly guess Qi Yan's movements after careful analysis. Firstly, the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had set up a trap in the Zhenwu domain to ambush Ji Tianqing. However, Meng Shuai was killed and Nangong Ao was rescued. Their plan was ruined. The imperial tutor would not continue to stay in the Zhenwu domain. He would definitely leave with his 3,000 soldiers. Therefore, Qi Yan would definitely not go to the Zhenwu domain. Secondly, the Shura God Emperor's base was in the Dark Night domain in the north. That was the Shura God Emperor's base camp. Usually, the imperial tutor, the Meng Shuai, and Qi Yan would guard that place. Now that the Meng Shuai had been killed, the morale of the imperial tutor's troops was unstable. Out of consideration for stability, the imperial tutor would most likely lead his soldiers back to the Dark Night domain to make further plans. Therefore, Ji Tianqing speculated that Qi Yan and his 2,000 soldiers must be on their way to the Dark Night domain. From the Water of Breath to the Dark Night domain, they would have to cross 8 domains. If Qi Yan were to travel alone, he might be able to arrive in 8 days. However, he would be traveling with 2,000 soldiers on a divine warship, so he wouldn't be traveling too fast. Even if he flew at full speed, it would still take 10 to 11 days. In Ji Tianqing's mind, he had already deduced the route from the Water of Breath to the Dark Night domain. He knew exactly which domains were on this route and which important locations it would pass through. Now that 2 days had passed, he could roughly estimate Qi Yan's location. However, it would take at least a day for the White Dragon to reach that location on the divine warship. By then, Qi Yan would be far away. Therefore, Ji Tianqing had to calculate the divine warship's route and where he would be able to intercept Qi Yan through complicated and meticulous calculations. To many godly kings, it was very difficult for them to guarantee the accuracy of this question given their knowledge. However, Ji Tianqing only needed 10 breaths of time to calculate the correct result. 2 days later. In the windswept empire's territory, the divine warship's route would cross with Qi Yan's. He could intercept and kill Qi Yan there. Of course, the premise was that Qi Yan was rushing back to the Dark Night domain as fast as he could. 2 days in the outside world was equivalent to 100 days in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianqing had collected more than 50 quintessence fragments. Only 17 of them belonged to god kings, while the rest belonged to intermediate god kings. Refining these quintessence fragments should have been faster. However, the first to be refined was, of course, the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment. After all, many of the imperial tutors and Meng Shuai's plans, actions, and secrets were hidden in the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul. Ji Tianqing spent a month carefully refining the Meng Shuai's memories. As expected, he had obtained countless secrets. Through the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul, he learned many of the Azura God Emperor's secrets. For example, in which year did God Emperor Xiao Luo lead his elite troops and which high-level divine kings left the divine world for the extraterrestrial starry skies. He also knew how many cultivation resources the boundless heaven continent collected every year and transported them to outer space once every 50 years. He also knew the rough route of the people responsible for transporting the resources. Another example was that of the current 18 ancient clans and 36 top forces. 6 of them pretended to be neutral on the surface, but they were secretly the Azura God Emperor's lackeys. There were also 3 superpowers that had been living in seclusion for more than 2,000 years. In fact, they had long since submitted to the Azura God Emperor. There were also many bits and pieces of information and secrets that ran through the timeline of more than 800 years. They clearly showed the Meng Shuai's experiences over the years. After refining the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment, Ji Tianqing gained a deeper and more thorough understanding of the boundless heaven continent. The number of experts the Azura God Emperor had left on the boundless heaven continent, the distribution of their forces, and the battle plans of the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai were all in Ji Tianqing's hands. To him, this was an immeasurably valuable gain. It was as valuable as a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact. At the very least, it would allow his rebel alliance to avoid detours and reduce casualties in their future operations against the imperial tutor. They could even gain insight into opportunities. Among the many secrets the Meng Shuai knew, there was one that was particularly important. That was, the Azura God Emperor knew that Kenshin had returned to the God realm and wanted to destroy his forces on the boundless heaven continent. However, the Azura God Emperor did not intend to pay attention to it. That was because the research in outer space had finally reached a critical juncture. Chapter 4099. Ji Tianqing had thought that he'd be able to learn more about the grey mist from the Meng Shuai's memories. He hadn't expected that even the Meng Shuai wouldn't know much about the Azura God Emperor's plans. After all, the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor had been ordered to guard the boundless heaven continent and hadn't left the God realm for nearly 1,000 years. Somewhat disappointed, Ji Tianqing thought to himself, it seems that I'll have to go to the stars if I want to investigate the grey mist. The Azura God Emperor is extremely secretive about this matter. Even confidants like the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai haven't divulged any useful information or secrets. After refining the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment, Ji Tianqing moved on to the other God King's quintessence fragments. Before he knew it, 100 days had passed. In total, he'd refined 10 quintessence fragments and gained 100 new laws of the divine Tao. The Meng Shuai was the main reason he'd gained so many laws of the divine Tao. After all, the Meng Shuai was a bona fide peak God King who'd mastered nearly 900 laws of the divine Tao. After this round of cultivation, Ji Tianqing's mastery of the divine Tao had reached 1,300 laws of the divine Tao. He still didn't know how many laws of the divine Tao a God Emperor could master. However, he knew that within the God King realm, he was already unprecedented and would not be surpassed in the future. That evening, the White Dragon steered the God-Slayer warship toward the predetermined location. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to call it a day after cultivating for 100 days in the distorted spacetime. He'd have to wait until he killed Qi Yan to refine the remaining 40 or so quintessence fragments. The setting sun was as red as blood. Outside Heaven's Bridge Pass, cold winds rustled. A dark green forest stretched in the distance, while withered yellow weeds swayed in the wind nearby. The God-Slayer warship flew straight toward Heaven's Bridge Pass. According to Ji Tianqing's calculations, Qi Yan and his subordinates would pass by when he arrived at Heaven's Bridge Pass. After all, this was where Qi Yan had to pass on his way back to the Dark Night domain. Heaven's Bridge Pass was a cliff between two mountain peaks that was more than 2,000 feet deep. Below the cliff was a 1,000-foot-wide river with endless water. The cliffs on both sides were straight and precipitous. The mountain peaks were more than 2,000 feet in height. Looking down at this cliff from high up in the sky, it looked as if it had been hacked by the heavens with a giant axe. That was why it had the name Heaven Chiming Pass. Below the cliff was filled with water vapor and clouds. The Bridge Pass was Heaven's Bridge Pass was always shrouded in a hazy mist. After the God-slaying battleship arrived at the Heaven Harmony Pass, it stopped at a height of 40,000 feet and hid within the clouds. Ji Tianqing and White Dragon stood in the cockpit, looking around vigilantly. At the same time, to search to find traces to find cheeses. Searched, after searching S to search AS to find S2s, after a while, Bai Long couldn't wait any longer. He asked, Master, according to your calculations, Qi Yan will definitely pass by here if he wants to return to the Dark Night domain. Even if your calculations are off, it shouldn't be more than 15 minutes, right? With the king level's flying speed, 15 minutes would cover a distance of a few 100,000 miles. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, Don't be anxious. Wait patiently. Bai Long nodded and said, Master, since there's a 15 minutes difference, wouldn't we be waiting for nothing if Qi Yan has already passed by? Ji Tianqing waved his hand and explained, It's impossible for such a situation to occur. I calculated based on his fastest speed, so he will only be later and not earlier. Bai Long thought it made sense. His master calculated based on Qi Yan's fastest speed. That was the ideal situation. But in reality, Qi Yan might not be able to maintain his fastest speed with 2,000 soldiers. Therefore, as long as Qi Yan and his men passed by Heaven's Bridge Pass, they wouldn't miss it. Master and Bai Long stood in the cockpit and waited patiently. Time passed quietly. The setting sun slowly set in the sky and the sky gradually darkened. 15 minutes passed quickly. There was still no movement south of Heaven's Bridge Pass. Bai Long was a little anxious. He secretly frowned and thought, even if there is a mistake in Master's estimation, 15 minutes have already passed. He was worried that they would miss, but he couldn't remind Ji Tianqing. Moreover, as his disciple, he should have more confidence in his master. Just like that, the god-slaying battleship concealed its tracks and aura. The master and disciple continued to wait. The master and disciple's expressions and reactions were different. Ji Tianqing's expression was calm and his eyes were clear. He looked calm and composed, as if he had a card up his sleeve. Bai Long, on the other hand, frowned and looked around. He was clearly worried and anxious. However, seeing his master's confidence and calmness, he calmed down a lot. Soon, another 15 minutes had passed. The setting sun had already set. The sky was getting darker and darker. Night gradually fell. Several times, White Dragon couldn't help but ask Ji Tianqing if they should search the south. Maybe Qi Yan and his men were on their way here. They could find them if they searched south. But that would make him look too impatient. Therefore, he could only put away his worries and anxiety and wait with his master. Finally, night fell. Heaven and earth returned to darkness. An hour had passed since Ji Tianqing's prediction, but Qi Yan still hadn't appeared. With the speed of the god-slaying battleship, Qi Yan and his men had already flown 5 million miles in an hour. No matter how one looked at it, the facts proved that Ji Tianqing's prediction was wrong. Bai Long was a little regretful. After hesitating for a while, he said, Master, maybe Qi Yan is too cunning. He didn't pass by here. Why don't we rush to the Dark Night domain to kill him? Everyone knew that Qi Yan was going to return to his lair. It would be a sure thing to kill him in the Dark Night domain. However, doing so would waste more time, and there would be more dangers and uncertainties. Ji Tianqing raised his hand to stop Bai Long. He said calmly, Don't worry. Wait a little longer. He should be here soon. In fact, Bai Long was certain that Qi Yan wouldn't be here. Seeing his master so persistent, he couldn't say anything. He could only wait patiently. Who knew that a miracle would happen after 100 breaths? South of Heaven Pass, in the night sky tens of thousands of miles away, 2 spots of light appeared. The 2 spots of light, one in front and one behind, streaked across the night sky like shooting stars. They flew toward Heaven Pass as fast as lightning. Bai Long's divine sense could only scan a radius of 10,000 miles. He could only see the light, but he couldn't see what was in the light. However, Ji Tianqing's divine sense had already seen it clearly. The 2 spots of light were 2 god-slaying battleships that were thousands of feet long. Although the god-slaying battleships didn't have anything special about them, and there were no emblems on their bodies. However, For two god-slaying battleships to pass by Heaven Pass at this time, there was no one else other than Qi Yan and his men. Chapter 4100. At first, White Dragon had been filled with disappointment and was about to give up. But he hadn't expected two warships to appear at this time. When he saw the two lights, his first reaction was that his master's prediction was correct. Qi Yan had indeed come. Even though he was an hour later than predicted, Qi Yan had still passed through Heaven's chimney pass. White Dragon finally understood why his master had been so calm until now. He'd been certain that Qi Yan would pass through here. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be that after killing the Meng Shuai, Master refined the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul and learned of the Meng Shuai's battle plan? The Meng Shuai had already ordered Qi Yan to return to the Anya domain. That should be the case. Otherwise, Master wouldn't be so confident. Thinking of this, White Dragon asked, "Master, did you refine the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul and learn of their plan? Was that why you were so certain that Qi Yan would pass through here?" Ji Tianqing calmly gazed ahead and slowly raised his hands. As the two lights drew closer and closer, he quickly gathered his divine power and prepared to use his ultimate skill to intercept the two warships. His answer to White Dragon's question was simple. No. Since he hadn't foreseen this, there was only one answer. He had indeed predicted that Qi Yan would pass through Heaven's chimney pass. White Dragon understood this as well. It was a matter of probability. After news of the Meng Shuai's death spread, Qi Yan had only two choices. The first was to return to the Anya domain as quickly as possible and meet up with the imperial tutor. The second was to head elsewhere as quickly as possible to carry out new orders or missions. In short, Qi Yan couldn't stay in the waters of respiration and wait for Ji Tianqing to kill him. There was only a 50% chance that Qi Yan would pass through Heaven's chimney pass. However, Ji Tianqing had analyzed the situation in Qi Yan's and the imperial tutor's styles of conduct. He was certain that Qi Yan would choose the safer option, which was to return to the Anya domain. While these thoughts flashed through White Dragon's mind, the two lights had already arrived. It seemed that in another 2 to 3 breaths of time, the two battleships would cross the Sky Chimera Pass and fly towards the north. At this moment, Ji Tianqing finally made his move. "Divine Clock, go!" With a low shout, he suddenly exerted his strength and summoned the primordial chaos bell. A fist-sized divine clock flew out of the battleship and appeared high up in the sky, instantly expanding billions of times. Buzz! Following a muffled explosion, the primordial bell of primordial chaos expanded to a radius of 10,000 miles. It descended from the sky and covered the surroundings of Heaven Chiming Pass. The primordial chaos bell also enveloped the god-slaying battleship and the two black battleships. Under the control of Ji Tianqing, the divine bell once again released a majestic divine power, forming a light wall in the depths of the ground, completely sealing off the space within a radius of 10,000 miles. As a result, the two battleships were unable to escape even if they had wings. The world was already pitch black, so the primordial chaos bell that spanned thousands of miles didn't seem to have any effect on them. The 2,000 experts in the two warships did not notice anything amiss. Only the few god generals piloting the battleships realized that the divine clock had descended from the sky and covered all the light. The few god generals panicked and hurriedly controlled the arrays of the battleships to stop the battleships. In this way, the tragedy of the battleships crashing into the divine clock was avoided. The two battleships stopped in the night sky. The few god generals sounded the alarm and immediately woke up the experts in the battleships. There were more than 1,000 soldiers in each battleship. They were all in their rooms circulating their energy or resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, they heard the urgent alarm. Everyone rushed out of their rooms and gathered in the battleships. These soldiers were all well trained and reacted quickly. In just 10 breaths, all 2,000 of them had gathered. Swoosh! Not only that, the few god generals piloting the battleships also opened the defensive arrays of the battleships. More than 200 cannons popped out and looked around cautiously. Once enemies appeared, they would open fire without hesitation. In fact, Ji Tianqing's speculation was right. The 2,000 well-trained soldiers in the two battleships were Qi Yan's subordinates. At this moment, Qi Yan was sitting in the main hall of the first battleship. He looked dignified as he issued a series of orders. He also spread out his divine consciousness to check the situation outside. Originally, he was a 9th-level divine king realm expert. His divine consciousness could cover a radius of 90,000 miles. However, his divine consciousness was blocked by the primordial chaos bell when it reached 10,000 miles. He could not extend it no matter how hard he tried. Qi Yan immediately realized that the divine artifact that sealed them was of a very high grade and powerful divine artifact. Then, his divine sense probed into the ground and came into contact with the underground light wall. The light wall was very powerful. Not only could it block his divine consciousness, but it also gave him great pressure. Qi Yan had a few upper king grade divine artifacts. He was well aware of the power of upper king grade divine artifacts. Therefore, he immediately determined that the divine clock that sealed them was most likely a superior king grade divine artifact. Based on Qi Yan's experience, even a peak divine king might not have a superior king grade divine artifact. Originally, when he knew that the Meng Shuai was intercepted by Kenshin, he was deeply afraid and fearful. On the way back to the Anya region, he was constantly on tenterhooks, guarding against Kenshin coming to kill him. The heavenly generals under his command kept persuading him that Kenshin had returned to Yenshu's grotto heaven and would not come to kill him. No matter how much the people analyzed and spoke with certainty, he did not let down his guard and worry. Even though he did not want to lose his dignity in front of his subordinates and appear to be timid and weak. However, he knew that Kenshin could not be judged by common sense. He was best at creating miracles and creating the unthinkable. Just like how Kenshin intercepted and killed the Meng Shuai. That was also impossible in the eyes of ordinary people. However, Kenshin still managed to do it. Just like now, the soldiers thought that Kenshin would not come to kill him. However, who could be sure? Who could guarantee? At least, Qi Yan thought that there was a 50% chance that Kenshin would come to kill him. Reality proved that Qi Yan was right. However, he was not happy at all. Instead, his mood became heavier and his expression turned uglier. Kenshin. It must be you. Qi Yan looked sharply at the night sky outside the warship and roared silently in his heart. Only you have the guts and strength to ambush me at Tianqiang Pass. Only you can take out a superior king-grade divine artifact so casually. It seemed to be to verify his guess. Not far away, Ji Tianqing put away the deity-slaying warship that had been in an invisible state and had concealed its aura. Swoosh! He appeared alone in the night sky and stood proudly. His expression was indifferent. With his hands behind his back, he quietly looked at the two divine warships. His cold and sharp gaze seemed to be able to see through the cover of the warship and was directed at Qi Yan in the crowd. Even though he did not speak, there was an invisible murderous aura and power that spread between heaven and earth. Chapter 4101. When Ji Tianqing put away the god-slaying battleship and removed his disguise and invisibility, he appeared in the night sky. The 2,000 soldiers in the two divine warships all noticed him. Everyone's divine consciousness was focused on him. Everyone was sizing him up. When they saw his face clearly, their expressions changed drastically. They were filled with shock and fear. It's Kenshin. Oh my God, it's Kenshin. No wonder he dared to ambush us alone. He's Kenshin. This is impossible. Didn't he return to the Yenshu cave? How could he be here? It's over. It's all over now. We're all dead. There was no doubt that although the 2,000 soldiers had not seen Kenshin with their own eyes, they knew what Kenshin looked like. After all, a month or two ago, the imperial preceptor and Meng Shuai had given the order to send the appearance of the sword god to all the soldiers under their command. To the soldiers under the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai, Kenshin was their ultimate target. How could they not recognize him? Before this, except for Qi Yan, no one would have thought that Kenshin would ambush them here. However, when it really happened, everyone was terrified and felt a deep sense of despair. Even if they had an absolute advantage in numbers, 2,000 against 1 Kenshin. Even if they had 40 divine kings and 2,000 Sir gods. Facing Kenshin alone, they still felt a chill down their spines. They were in extreme despair. This was Kenshin's reputation. A powerhouse who was trusted and relied on by his teammates and feared by his opponents. Just think about it, the Meng Shuai was so powerful that he led 2,400 soldiers. Weren't they all killed by the sword god? Not a single one was left alive. Their 2,000 men were no match for the Meng Shuai. Was there any suspense in the outcome? Of course not. While the 2,000 soldiers were filled with fear and despair, their morale had also fallen to the bottom, and their morale was at an all-time low. If it weren't for Qi Yan and the other divine generals, these soldiers would have been defeated long ago. Fortunately, Qi Yan was calm and collected. When he saw that all the officers and soldiers had ashen faces, he shouted coldly, "What are you panicking for?" No matter how strong Kenshin was, he was only one person. He's just a peak divine king after all and not the invincible god emperor. What's there to be afraid of? Qi Yan's deep, dignified voice reverberated throughout the warship. At the same time, it was transmitted to another warship. The 2,000 soldiers who were slightly panicked and frightened quieted down a lot, but the fear in their hearts did not decrease. After all, Qi Yan's words didn't have much effect and couldn't change the outcome. Qi Yan continued, "I know you're afraid of the sword god's reputation. But could fear solve the problem? Would he be spared from death just because he was afraid of him? He's already used a supreme-grade king-grade divine clock to seal off an area of 10,000 miles. We have no way out. Even if it's me, it's impossible to escape." Hearing his words, the 2,000 soldiers became even more panicked. Many of their expressions and eyes were filled with fear and despair. They had no morale left at all. If it weren't for military rules and discipline, they would have already scattered and fled for their lives. However, they didn't do so. First, they were restricted by military rules. Second, they knew they couldn't escape. Even their commander, Qi Yan, admitted that they couldn't escape. How could they survive? The only thing they could do now was to stick together and listen to their commander's orders. Only then would they have a slim chance of survival. Seeing the soldiers gradually calm down, Qi Yan felt slightly comforted. He said earnestly, "I believe everyone understands that we're in a desperate situation. Since we can't escape or hide, fear won't solve the problem. Then we can only fight with our backs to the river and fight to the death. Yes, we're not as strong as Kenshin. 2,000 soldiers are just cannon fodder in front of him. However, we have to work together and treat this battle as the last fight of our lives. Even if we die in battle, we have to die with honor, brilliance, and value. Even if I die here with you, we have to drag the Kenshin down with us. If we can die together, then we'll be the greatest heroes and our names will go down in history." Qi Yan's words ignited the flames of hope in the 2,000 soldiers. Everyone's dim eyes regained their luster. Everyone was convinced by what he said, and all of them were determined to fight to the death, ready to fight one last time. Even if they died in battle, they had to bite off a piece of the Kenshin's flesh. If they could die together with the Kenshin, it would be worth it even if they died. Their names would definitely spread throughout the world and bring honor to their ancestors. As a result, the soldiers who had been listless and demoralized a moment ago became energetic and high-spirited again. If one observed carefully, they would realize that it wasn't the high morale of being invincible and full of confidence. Instead, it was the determination and heroism of being willing to die for justice. Qi Yan saw this and was very gratified. He quickly ordered, "All soldiers, listen to my orders. Other than the soldiers guarding the warships, everyone else will follow me and form the 6 directions battle formation. Surround the Kenshin and fight to the death with him. Soldiers operating the warships must go all out and look for any opportunity to bombard the Kenshin." After giving the order, he led 10 of his personal guards and flew out of the warships first. Then, more than 1,900 soldiers flew out of the warships one after another and formed a battle formation in the night sky. The 80 soldiers guarding the warships immediately controlled the 2 warships and adjusted their direction to attack Ji Tianqing from the left and right. However, Ji Tianqing wouldn't give them a chance and wouldn't waste too much time making them form a battle formation. He didn't greet them and didn't waste any time. He attacked directly. Rain of Swords. In order to end the battle as quickly as possible, he used a large-scale destructive skill right from the start. He used all of his power and pointed his swords at the sky. His entire body released an invisible aura. At this moment it was as if the heavens and earth were under his control. Even the thousands of stars in the outer space were under his control. Suddenly, countless stars appeared in the sky and poured down like a meteor shower. However, the night sky was blocked by the primordial chaos bell, so no one could see it. Qi Yan and his soldiers only saw Ji Tianqing raise his hand to cast a spell, but they didn't know what was going on. Of course, they didn't care about this detail. They were busy forming a battle formation. After 2 breaths, as many as 90,000 starry swords fell from the sky and approached Heaven's Pass. At this moment, Ji Tianqing immediately put away the primordial chaos bell to prevent it from blocking the 10,000 starry swords. The divine bell that had been suppressing everyone disappeared. Tens of thousands of miles of heaven and earth were illuminated by the starry swords. The 2,000 soldiers couldn't get used to the sudden brightness. They couldn't open their eyes because of the brightness. Everyone was stunned for a moment and subconsciously looked up at the sky. When they saw the densely packed starry swords, everyone widened their eyes in horror and roared in horror. Chapter 4102. It was a pity. The 2,000 soldiers had yet to get into formation. When they saw the starry swords clearly, the rain of swords was only 100 miles away from them. Even though Ji Tianqing had removed the primordial chaos bell and released the seal on the 2,000 soldiers, it was too late for them to escape. At this critical moment, only Qi Yan, 40 god kings, and some god lords instinctively released their divine power and formed a defensive shield. Then, 90,000 starry swords covered an area of 10,000 miles and drowned Heaven Chang Pass and the 2,000 soldiers. Bang bang bang. Boom 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 boom. Sword lights splashed everywhere and a deafening explosion resounded through the sky. The lofty and dangerous Heaven Chang Pass was instantly reduced to ruins by the 10,000 starry swords. Whether it was the mountain, the deep valleys, or the flowing rivers, they were all flattened by the starry swords. Dust was flying everywhere and billions of starry swords were flying everywhere. Countless soldiers were screaming and wailing as they were on the verge of death. At this moment, everyone finally realized how powerful Kenshin was. Every starry sword that was 10,000 feet long had the power to destroy heaven and earth. It was enough to kill a lower god king instantly. 9 starry swords came down like dense raindrops and their power was indescribably terrifying. Under the attack of the starry swords, the defensive shield that the soldiers had formed with all their might was as fragile as paper. The muffled and explosive sounds were the sound of the shields being broken. Most of the starry swords that flew everywhere were the fragments of the shields after they were broken. In just one breath, over 1,000 god lords were killed by the starry swords. They died without a complete corpse. More than 10 unlucky god kings were also killed by the starry swords. Not even their bones were left. Hundreds of god lords were lucky enough to survive, but they were severely injured and unable to fight anymore. Only Qi Yan and a few upper god kings were protected by king-grade high-grade divine artifacts and barely managed to block the attack of the 10,000 starry swords. They were not injured. The rest of the people were either lightly or heavily injured. Even the 2 warships that were glittering and ready to fire at Ji Tianqing were blown into smithereens by the giant swords and scattered in the ruins. The morale that the soldiers had accumulated with great difficulty was immediately extinguished by the rain of swords. The surviving soldiers looked at the wreckage around them and the tragic scene of flesh and blood flying in the air. They were all horrified and frightened. They no longer had the slightest bit of fighting spirit, and their minds were in a mess as they fled in all directions with all their might. However, the effect and power of the rain of swords was far more than just a single attack. After falling to the ground, tens of thousands of starry swords were shattered. However, there were still 80,000 starry swords flying back and forth in the sky, forming a huge sword net. Swish! Swish! The sword light shuttled back and forth, and everything within a radius of 10,000 miles was a world of starlight. This terrifying sword net was like a ball of starlight with a radius of 10,000 miles. It illuminated the surrounding 10,000 miles, and it was as bright as the moon. However, its lethality and the terrifying consequences it caused were completely different from that of the moon. The hundreds of injured monarch god experts were instantly sliced into pieces, turning into a rain of blood that filled the sky. Even many mid-level divine kings couldn't withstand the attack of the giant swords. They couldn't last more than 3 breaths before they were cut into pieces. After a long time, the power of the 80,000 starry swords was used up and gradually dissipated. The world returned to peace, and the ruins returned to darkness. Only the rain of blood was still falling, and the ruins were dyed red. The world was silent. The 20 or so survivors were dumbfounded. Qi Yan was also stunned. 2,000 divine monarchs and a dozen low-level and mid-level divine kings were all dead. Only Qi Yan, 8 high-level divine kings, and 14 mid-level divine kings survived by luck. Moreover, only Qi Yan was lightly injured. The others were all heavily injured, and they looked very pathetic and miserable. In the rain of blood, Ji Tianqing was still standing in the night sky with his hands behind his back. He didn't take out any weapons. He quietly looked at Qi Yan and the others. He didn't say anything and just slowly walked over. Instantly, Qi Yan and the others trembled in fear and instinctively stepped back. Ha ha ha, a few mid-level divine kings who were severely injured were so scared that their teeth chattered. Before this, Qi Yan and the other divine kings couldn't understand. Did Kenshin really kill the Meng Shuai and his 2,400 soldiers by himself? It was too unbelievable. Kenshin must have a large number of divine kings helping him. Otherwise, he couldn't have done it. Now, they finally knew the answer. That's right, Kenshin killed the Meng Shuai and his subordinates by himself. As for how Kenshin did it, they had already seen it with their own eyes. Kenshin, you win. Seeing Ji Tianqing approach step by step, Qi Yan's heart was dead. He was full of despair and he sighed with a dejected expression. More than 20 elders also endured their injuries and stared vigilantly at Ji Tianqing. They slowly stepped back. Ji Tianqing continued to approach. He looked straight at Qi Yan and asked, Qi Yan, do you know why I am here to kill you? Ha! Qi Yan sneered and said, as everyone knows, you sent Nangong Ao and Nangong Qing to lead the Nangong clan's intelligence network to investigate our generals. You are making a death list. As the Inspector Commander, I am one of the top experts in the Boundless Heaven continent. Of course, I am on your death list. From the moment you killed Jinshuang, I knew that you would come to kill me sooner or later. Ji Tianqing frowned and said coldly, that's only part of the reason. I can wait and kill you when the time comes. But I didn't. I calculated the path you would take to return to the Dark Night domain and killed you here. Think carefully, what other reason could there be? Qi Yan also frowned and asked doubtfully, isn't this reason enough? Other than this reason, I have no enmity with you. I didn't attack you back then. Seeing that he couldn't think of a second reason, Ji Tianqing's eyes became even colder. He answered directly, the second reason is that I want to kill you to avenge the eighth elder, Nangong Qing. Qi Yan was even more confused. He said with a startled face, you want to avenge Nangong Qing. But as far as I know, you have no relationship with Nangong Qing. Ha ha ha. You are such a cold-blooded and heartless person, Kenshin. How can you avenge a stranger? You saved Nangong Ao first and then avenged Nangong Qing. In fact, it was just an act for the Nangong clan and other forces to see, right? You have to let everyone think that you, Kenshin, sympathize with your subordinates and are very loyal. Only then can you buy people's hearts, ha ha ha. I didn't expect that the high and mighty Kenshin would play such a childish trick. Knowing that he was going to die, Qi Yan was no longer afraid and mocked Ji Tianqing with disdain. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 4103. The 20 God Kings nodded in agreement with Qi Yan's analysis. Everyone felt that it was reasonable. They were very disdainful and contemptuous of Ji Tianqing, and they all started to mock him. They probably knew that they were going to die, so they felt a sense of relief. They were not afraid at all, so they were very indulgent. Being able to laugh at the sword god once before he died was probably a form of consolation. Ji Tianqing could understand their feelings. He knew that this was their last release before they died, so he was not angry. He looked at Qi Yan and the others indifferently and said calmly, you sinister, despicable, and inhumane people are used to seeing other people's lives as nothing. Therefore, your way of thinking and thinking only cares about benefits. It's normal for you to think this way, and I don't bother to explain. After all, your lives have come to an end. I won't see you again. After saying the last 3 words, he took out the sword of burial of heaven and prepared to send Qi Yan and the others on their way. Qi Yan also gripped his 2 swords tightly and stared at Ji Tianqing with murderous intent. He roared, soldiers, although we are not Kenshin's match, we would rather die standing than live kneeling. Even if we bleed to the last drop of our blood, we will never surrender. Charge with me, kill. After roaring, Qi Yan waved his 2 swords and his entire body exploded with killing intent. The 20 God Kings were affected by his solemn and stirring aura. Even though they were heavily injured, they threw aside their lives and waved their divine weapons recklessly, shouting as they charged toward Ji Tianqing. However, an extremely ironic scene occurred. More than 20 God Kings charged at Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety. They solemnly and resolutely charged at Ji Tianqing. Qi Yan, who was shouting the battle cry, stayed where he was and did not move. When everyone charged toward Ji Tianqing and both sides were about to clash, he quickly retreated and teleported away. That's right. He urged the injured God Kings to charge toward Ji Tianqing, hoping that they could hold Ji Tianqing back. As for himself, he had already made up his mind to take the opportunity to escape. Previously, the primordial chaos bell had sealed off a radius of 5,000 miles. He could not escape even if he wanted to. However, it was different now. Ji Tianqing had already put away the divine clock. There were no seals or restrictions around them. If he didn't escape now, when would he? Ha! You are indeed sinister and shameless. Ji Tianqing's divine sense had been locked onto Qi Yan the entire time. In fact, he had already guessed that Qi Yan was going to take the opportunity to flee when he heard Qi Yan's solemn, stirring, and heroic roar. The corners of his mouth curled into a contemptuous sneer. He threw out the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand and thrust it at Qi Yan. The old man's words were righteous, impassioned, and sincere as if they came from the bottom of his heart. The other divine kings were all stunned. They stared at the white-haired divine king, thinking to themselves, when did old Du become so quick-witted? What a beautiful statement. Thus, the divine kings came back to their senses and repeated the white-haired divine king's words. They looked as if they were sincerely remorseful. Ji Tianqing couldn't be bothered to look at them. He said expressionlessly, surrendering is useless. I don't need captives. With that, he waved his hand and sent out sword light and fist shadows. He swung his divine hammer at everyone. Ah! Kenshin, you bastard! Kenshin, you are so vicious! The divine kings were filled with fear. They roared angrily and ran for their lives. But it was all for naught. After a series of muffled bangs, the divine kings were all killed. Shards of their godheads were scattered all over the place. Ji Tianqing didn't waste time picking up the spoils. His figure flickered and disappeared. The next moment, he teleported thousands of miles away. He tore through the night sky as fast as lightning and chased after Qi Yan. At this moment, the sword of burial of heaven was chasing after Qi Yan. It had already flown 200,000 miles. Qi Yan saw that Ji Tianqing wasn't chasing after him. Only a divine sword was chasing after him. He was both shocked and furious. Damn it! Even Kenshin's sword is so heaven-defying. It can even take the initiative to chase after me. He wasn't convinced. He wanted to stop and fight to destroy the sword of burial of heaven. But he had also heard of the legend of the sword of burial of heaven. He knew that it was a divine sword with spirituality and consciousness. Most importantly, Kenshin could catch up to him at any time. Thus, he dismissed this thought and continued to teleport and flee. But unfortunately, no matter how fast he was, he couldn't be compared to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing looked very relaxed. It was as if he was taking a stroll in the night sky. But with every step he took, he could teleport thousands of miles away. He took 40 consecutive steps and teleported 400,000 miles. His expression didn't change. Finally, when he was 450,000 miles away, he caught up with Qi Yan. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 4104. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was Ji Tianqing's natal divine weapon, so they were connected. As long as the Sword of Burial of Heaven followed Qi Yan, Ji Tianqing would be able to find him no matter how far he ran. After Ji Tianqing caught up to Qi Yan, he immediately swung his sword and sent out a few sword lights. He also raised his divine hammer and smashed it at Qi Yan. Qi Yan was already injured, and he was exhausted from running. His divine power was weak. Seeing the dazzling sword lights and the mountain-sized hammer coming at him, he was terrified. He could only stop running and block with all his might. He knew how powerful the sword lights and hammer shadows were, so he didn't dare to hold back. He had to use all his divine weapons and defensive items to unleash all his potential. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. He held his sword with both hands and swung it. The sword lights formed a wall. Another 4 divine artifacts circled around him, circling and dancing, forming a thick divine light shield. He was burning with 5 colored flames. He used all his divine power, and his robe fluttered. In the next moment, several sword lights that could split heaven and earth struck Qi Yan hard. Kaboom! With an earth-shattering sound, the light shield formed by Qi Yan's 2 swords was shattered. Immediately afterward, there was a series of muffled bang 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 sounds. The defensive light shield formed by the divine weapons around Qi Yan was also shattered by the sword lights. At this point, Qi Yan's double defense had been destroyed, and Ji Tianqing's sword lights had also collapsed. But the mountain-sized hammer shadow came at him. Qi Yan couldn't block it anymore. He could only burn his divine power and divine blood, turning them into bloody flames and using the last of his strength to protect himself. This was a forbidden divine power. Once it was used, it would consume thousands of years of divine power. It couldn't be recovered, and it would cause permanent damage to the body. Qi Yan wouldn't use this move unless he had no other choice. At this moment, he had turned into a giant bloody fireball. The surging blood-red flames enveloped him so tightly that his figure could barely be seen. Unfortunately, even this couldn't save his life. Boom! The mountain-sized shadow of the divine hammer smashed down and engulfed his figure. The blood-red fireball was smashed into smithereens on the spot, and countless blood-red fragments burst out. Qi Yan's body was also destroyed, turning into fragments that flew everywhere. Even though his divine body had been destroyed, his godhead had survived by a fluke. He had only suffered heavy injuries and was currently fleeing for his life. Even if he knew that he would not be able to escape from Ji Tianqing's pursuit and that he would die without a doubt. However, it was impossible for him to sit and wait for death, and he would never give up the slightest hope of survival. Shua. After Nangong Buhua received the message, he was naturally surprised and shocked. He was surprised by Ji Tianqing's strategy and efficiency. Then, he replied to Ji Tianqing, saying that all the disciples of the 8 forces had arrived today. Just as Ji Tianqing had stipulated, each force had sent 1,000 people. Among them, there were 20 divine kings and 200 upper divine lords. The other 700+ disciples were all middle and lower divine lords. There was no other way. Only those who were above the divine lord realm were qualified to participate in the war at the pinnacle of the boundless heaven continent. Those divine spirits in the heavenly god realm were not even qualified to be cannon fodder. After all, a war of this level was already worthy of being called a war of the gods. A few forces followed Ji Tianqing's rules. However, there were 2 forces that surprised Ji Tianqing. One was the War Gods clan. They had sent 1,200 people. Among them were 30 divine kings and 300 upper divine lords. The other was the Phoenix clan of the divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven. They had sent 1,300 disciples. Among them were 32 divine kings and 350 upper divine lords. This undoubtedly showed that these 2 ancient clans trusted and supported Ji Tianqing more. It was also obvious that they were not afraid of sacrificing themselves. They wanted to make a name for themselves in this war. This was because when the alliance was formed, Ji Tianqing had said that when they achieved hegemony in the future, they would be rewarded according to their contributions. No one knew how Ji Tianqing would reward them. However, they all believed that Ji Tianqing would not be stingy. There would definitely be substantial benefits. It would definitely not be just verbal praise or some insignificant glory. Even if Ji Tianqing did not reward them with substantial benefits, they would still gain Ji Tianqing's trust, regard, and friendship. There was no need to mention the benefits of becoming friends with Kenshin. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.